Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with Andres Barbosa, co-host, our fact checker, our podcast advisor and coach, veteran coach from Miami. Excited about tonight's chat. We're going to call up Steve Robertson. I've known Steve probably 30 years. Author, speaker, consultant. Steve and his wife, Colleen, they came to the United States from South Africa. They started, I have to go Steve, he started with tennis instruction. Julian Tina Krinsky, we had them on. I'm sure he'll talk about Adrian Caselli and the staff, people who worked there for 30 years. What Steve did is he transitioned very quickly after being there, I guess, to a company leader, I would say, where he was recruiting, hiring, training people from all over the world. I was privileged to go up to Philadelphia, where they were based on several college campuses. It was Julian Krinsky School of Tennis, and then it became Julian Krinsky Camps and Programs, or Programs and Camps. But he's logged so many miles around the world. He's now regarded as a generational expert. Both Andres and I have read his book, Aliens Among Us. 10 surprising truths about Gen Zs. But let's get Steve on the phone. I always think of Steve when I say this to kids. I heard him say it one time, and I like to remember where I heard something. You do one push-up, and you start to grow muscles. But let's call him up.
Is that where it came from?
That's where it came from, yeah. And Andres and I have done our homework. We've read Steve-O's book.
Yes. I'm back in time here and read on a deadline.
Good evening.
Steve Robertson, thank you very much for being a guest on our podcast.
So excited to be with you tonight, Steve.
We want to go back to your first days and how you got connected with tennis. And I know obviously you've gone on to, nothing's bigger than better than tennis, but we do say a figure of speech to bigger and better things. No, let's go back long before you and Colleen, your wife, came over to the States. So you want to tell us how you first got connected with tennis and just your story from the beginning days?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Well, thanks again for having me on. It's just a joy to chat with you. Well, way back when, in the 1900s, 19-something, right? Doesn't it sound like a long time ago, 1900-something?
Yeah.
I was actually, grew up in South Africa, and I was an avid sportsman. And you won't believe how my tennis career started. So I played cricket. I was really good at cricket. I played all the sports growing up, rugby, soccer. And I got introduced to baseball at a really young age. So I played in under 10, and I was good enough to be selected to play provincial baseball in South Africa. And then I played again in under 13, and I was good enough to be selected. And then the fear factor hit me when I was supposed to move up to under 16s. And Steve, the bases were so far apart. And here I am. I was a little fellow, this little guy, just turned 13, and I'm playing baseball. The guys in under 16 have all got beards, and they're pitching so fast, and the distance between the bases is ridiculous. And I was like, I can't do this. And that was the start of my tennis career. I was too scared to play and started playing tennis and found out that I had a little bit of a knack for it. And played all the way through school. And I ended up falling in love with the game of tennis so much so that after going through all my coaching courses in South Africa, I ended up on some of the panels there. I was a national examiner at one point, and I was the chairman of our coaches association. And at the time I had a really nice tennis business, coaching tennis in South Africa. We had a whole lot of tennis coaches that kind of worked with me, kind of actually shared our technology. We had some really cool technology. So we did all their kind of background, back-end invoicing and phone calls. And so as a result of that, we ended up having kind of a conglomerate of tennis coaches. I owned many tennis South Africa, so I ran all the leagues and all the equipment and did all the training. And that's how I met Joe Webb now, who introduced me to her brother, Mark Span. Of course, you know both of them. And it was Mark Span who brought me over to from South Africa to America one summer on a tour with some of my kids from South Africa. And who did he introduce me to? Another gentleman that you know very well. His name is Julian Krinsky. And so a little bit of back and forth, and Julian invited me to join him here in America, which a couple of months later we did. Myself, my wife Colleen, and my two kids, Jeremy and Sarah. And I was on the court teaching here in Philadelphia for about a year and a half. And then they found out that I didn't really know what I was doing. So they whipped me off the court. And I started getting involved in some of the administrative components of the business. And baseball introduced me to tennis, and tennis brought me to America, the home of baseball. How about that?
Yeah, you don't think of baseball being played in South Africa. I remember one time being in Holland and watching girls play softball. I was just shocked. I've never really heard of someone playing baseball. I guess they play baseball everywhere.
I have my father's Brazilian, and I actually know the only Brazilian baseball player to ever reach the major leagues, Jan Gomes. His father is a tennis guy down in Miami. It's crazy. I thought Brazil was unique. I didn't even think South Africans played baseball.
Yeah, well, that's why it was so good, because there were only a few that played.
That's funny. Well, tell us about Julian's the business that he built, and it even became more international during the recession, correct? Where he, there was always people from all over the world, but it just seemed like it became more and more international. I know I would go up and do a workshop a weekend to train the coaches, and there was, it was close to 45 coaches, and they were from all over.
Yeah, Steve, when I met you about 25 years ago, and when I first got here, and at that time, Julian's business was, it's a 40-something, it would be 42 years old today, but, at the time, the focus was certainly tennis. We had golf, and we had one other program, a little enrichment program, and at one point, there were about 65 tennis pros and 35 golf pros that were in the program, certainly from all over the world, and the reason that worked for us is that it was just finding people that had a good work ethic and wanted to enjoy the experience of coming to visit America, work, and get an opportunity to see America. So that worked so beautifully for us just for all the years. And, just before COVID arrived, we were probably about 5%, I don't know what Julian would say, probably only about 5% of our business was tennis by that point. Not because tennis had shrunk dramatically, but because the other parts of the business had also grown. So that was a wonderful time, when I first arrived, with tennis being as big as it was. And certainly we had children from all over and coaches as well from all over. You're 100% correct.
And then I remember calling you for advice with student visas or work visas. Tell us a little bit about that. Because you had to bring people in to get work permits.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the work visas was for a number of years, we had people coming over during summer on these work visas. It's called a J1 visa. And it didn't take us long to realize that the organizations that were giving us visas, that was their business, right? So there was always this upcharge and this cost involved that they needed to cover their expenses as a business. So Julian and I decided to apply to the State Department for our own visas. And it took a 2-year journey for us to be approved, but eventually we got approved and we were able to issue our own visas, which was amazing. So as a result of that, the ability to bring international people to work with us during the summer was relatively easy. It took us a significant financial burden off the table, and we could give more of that money to the coaches and the staff members as opposed to paying it to some agency. But that also led to me learning lots and lots and lots about visas. In fact, we ended up bringing people over in a full-time capacity on H visas and O visas and P visas. And so through the years, I got to know a whole lot about visas. And so, as I said, we ended up, if I had to do a quick count, we probably were, in the 25 years that I was here, we probably helped 15, 20, if not more, 25 people move from their countries, wherever those might have been, to full-time living in America. And it was all through tennis.
With a full-time visa, that's much different than getting someone a short-term visa, correct?
Yeah, very much different. The processes are much more complicated, and we didn't have the ability to do that ourselves. So that was a case of not going through an agency, but certainly lawyers were involved and dealing with the State Department to get people approved for all sorts of reasons. Funny a story. One day I went down to Mar-a-Lago to help a tennis pro who was working at Mar-a-Lago with some visa questions. And, well, we know what happened at Mar-a-Lago. It turns out that Trump became president. And I remember him saying at one point, nobody knows more about immigration than me. And I was like, I do. I actually had to go down to your club to help you with a visa. I didn't tell him that personally, of course, but I thought I was quite funny saying that. So, yeah, those visas complicated and a serious commitment on both the sponsor, which was us, and certainly the person who's coming over, because it's a serious commitment, that you have to make on both ends, financially and just for a period of time. But I can't think of one story that ended poorly, and so our track record of finding amazing people who just loved the game of tennis and wanted to add to and amplify what we were doing in terms of tennis here. We were very fortunate to find the right people.
Why don't you touch upon a little bit how much the business expanded? And it was far more than just tennis. I know you mentioned golf, but it seemed like you had everything under the sun. I mean, I remember the program you had. I think it was really the brainchild was the book Moneyball. I believe, but you just had so everything from SAT prep to cooking to
amazing.
Yeah, why don't you talk
great
about
memory.
it?
Great memory, Steve. So, I arrived, tennis, golf, and a program called Enrichment was really what Julian was doing at the time. And Enrichment was an interesting program. It was a much more academic pursuit. So you'd have students doing, as you said, SAT prep, fashion, cooking, business, robotics, a whole range of options. It was like a menu that students got an opportunity to choose from. We had magic and comedy and improv and anything you can imagine. And for a while, that market that served that market really, really well. And that's, when we started getting 15 years ago is where I really started to see this change. We were so fortunate for all these years. We had paid really particular attention to the students that came to us from all around the world. And we had students at one point from about 140 countries and all over the United States. And so we got to watch them every summer coming through. And as they came through, how they grew, so we got to see them go from their young years all the way through their teen years. And eventually some of them even worked for us and then became parents and sent their kids to us. But the reason I mention that is because as we were paying attention to them on a year-by-year basis, we had to look at them as customers. And you'll know Julian always looked at the students that came to us as customers and obviously their families. And he was always focusing on how do we, serve our customer well and delight them. And what that led to was us spending a lot of time really trying to understand, ask, speak to, and spend time around them, and saw what it was that brought out that joy and that spark in our customers. And so based on that, we would build programming, for the next year and the next year. And in so doing, keep our customers coming back and happy. And that led to a number of different really, really cool opportunities. We ended up partnering with a number of different universities. And by that point, the market had shifted a little bit in the sense that we started seeing that the traditional feel of a summer camp where many, many, many parents would primarily just be happy if the kids had fun, there was the shift towards spending their free time in a productive way. And it was this whole premise of upskilling their child. It wasn't so much a race against the next door neighbor, the Joneses, but there was this kind of, call it an arms race almost, of getting your child to be exposed and experienced in as many things as you can to put them in a better position for their own future. And so we ended up partnering with the University of Pennsylvania. We ended up partnering with Wharton University. We ended up having 5 programs with Wharton. One was a business program. We had a sports business program. We had a sports analytics program. We ended up having at University of Pennsylvania additional programs. You know, we had a medical program with the University of Pennsylvania. We had an architecture program, an art program. At one point, we had about 1,000 kids a week at the University of Pennsylvania. We also ended up running programs at Yale and certainly at Villanova. But by that point, you know, our infrastructure had grown so much that we were in a position, exactly what I was doing in South Africa, where we could offer smaller operators the opportunity to leverage our infrastructure. So we could help them market, we could help them staff, we could help them hire staff, train staff. And we ended up running programs in a white label capacity. So in other words, our name wasn't on the door. The other program's name was on the door, but behind the scenes, we did a whole lot of the heavy lifting and got paid for that. So we ran programs at MIT, we ran programs at Michigan, and just a number of different universities. And so little bit by little bit, our programs grew. And one of the areas we really grew in was not just in offering different kinds of programs where the students could upskill and really, you know, deep dive, but we also really grew in terms of our training. And so we worked really hard in understanding what was necessary to impart to, you know, a seasonal staff in a really quick and concise way so that they could action out our kind of vision when the students were there. And so at one point, you know, actually this last summer, although it's not Julians programs anymore, but this last summer we were close to 1,700 seasonal staff. This year we'll probably be at about 2,000 seasonal staff. And so the programs have continued to grow, and it's based on us really trying to understand and know what it is, what our customer wants, what they love.
And that was mostly boarding students?
So with Julian's programs, we were probably 80% residential students or overnight students. COVID has knocked that model out a little bit, and currently this past summer we had about 40,000 weeks of camp. Those are almost exclusively day camps. So we're only now starting to move back into that, one, international market, and two, that sleepover market. We did run programs since COVID with Penn Med and with the 76ers and with the Brooklyn Nets as sleepover camps, but since COVID, the focus has predominantly been day camp for somewhat obvious reasons. But prior to that, it was about 80% sleepover from around the world, yeah.
I know we have to get in the intellectual side of this, but I don't really think a lot of the Philly fans are considered to be intellectuals. Tell us, you're a Philadelphia fan, all these years in Philadelphia now.
Huge. I'm a everything Philadelphia fan. So working with the Phillies is great. They're an amazing organization, and they had an amazing run, as did the Eagles, of course. So I've lived and died with every team in the city. I do think baseball is an intellectual game, but as far as Philadelphia and Philadelphians are concerned, I think you have to go a long way to find fans that are in love with their town and in love with their teams as you do in Philadelphia. And I've grown to love the teams in the same way as the Philadelphia fans do.
Yeah, no, I just mean the rowdiness and the intensity. They could be intellectuals, but when the whistle blows in Tampa,
can't be that intellectual if they're trying to defend Joel Embiid and James Harden yesterday for their flagrant fouls. But
listen. Let's not go. What I can say is that when you love your team and you support your team, as a player, I can only imagine how incredible that must be. And Yeah, so there are certainly some moments that professional athletes would like to take back. There's certainly some moments that some fans would like to take back. I don't think anybody can say that they've had a perfect run. So
What was that?
what I can say is that the fan base actually in the sport is quite different. So I'm sure you've experienced it. The hockey fans are a very different crowd to the football fans, that are very different to the baseball and the basketball and even the soccer and obviously the tennis fans. So you get an interesting mix of all these fans, but you've got to support your city, right or wrong.
The Eagles fans, aren't they famous for for booing Santa Claus? I mean, that's
The snowballs, throwing snowballs at Santa Claus.
He deserved that. Okay.
What I was going to say, there's a bar in Tampa. I took my kids in there one time. We were out Christmas shopping, and I said, "Okay, guys, we'll get you something to drink." And it was a Sunday afternoon, and we walked in, and everybody was wearing a green football jersey, and they called themselves Tampadelphia.
I love it.
That was kind of fun.
Fly, Eagles, fly.
Exactly.
There's the famous thing with Ty Domi, the hockey player, and the Philly fan who he ended up in the penalty box. But the fun story about that is that went back and forth a little bit, but they ended up they're great friends now.
Amazing. I'm fortunate to be doing a little bit of work with the Eagles, and they're an amazing organization as well. And, the little bit of opportunity we get to get close up and see how these organizations work. They are massive organizations, and, there's a lot of people doing a lot of things right to keep these ships floating and going in the right direction. And it's really, really easy for that to come undone. All you need is a bit of a losing season, and all of a sudden everything goes to pot. So take my hat off to them. Those people have many, many sleepless nights.
Let's back up a little bit with, so you started working off the court, and Colleen, you had quite a few people working for you. I think most people in the tennis camp business think it's just something you put together a little bit here and a little bit there, but it was really a full-time operation with a full-time staff. Why don't you just touch upon that? It's a year-round business to build a summer camp.
Yeah, we had, so Julian had 2 tennis clubs, and so obviously those were fully staffed with tennis pros, which was lovely. And then we had another component of the business, which was to kind of manage the summer programs. And so we had probably close to 20 people that had their hands in a full-time capacity involved with that, and probably a few more that were not in a full-time capacity. And the nature of our business, if you think about it, if any of the people listening are familiar with traditional summer camps, many of the traditional summer camp people that they arrive, at the age of 7 or 8 for the first time to a traditional summer camp, and then they go to that same camp until they're 15 and become a CIT, a counselor in training, and then by the time they're 16, 17, and 18, they become a counselor, and then, they go to college. And so that model is just a lot less intense from a marketing, programming, planning perspective. Those people tend to own their own facilities. And so what we have here is a completely different model. We rent facilities, we use universities, so we move in almost the day before the students arrive, and we have to set up and use someone else's facilities. From a marketing perspective, the nature of our programs, outside of things like tennis and golf, where you might come multiple times, we had about a 30, 35, 40% return rate for those kind of programs. But we had other programs that you would only qualify to go to one time. So you could go to this 4-week program at Wharton, and then you couldn't go to it again. So as a result, our business was very much geared. Our marketing department was marketing from day one. We were spending hours and millions of dollars reaching the ends of the globe to try and tell the story of what we were offering. And Julian had put together an incredible marketing team that did that. And Tina, his wife, Tina Krinsky, kind of spearheaded that for a long time. And she had just an incredible insight, from a marketing perspective. But that made it something that was required, all year round. And then when it came to staffing, when you start to staff the volume of people we're staffing, your staffing process begins in September, October already, and the visa, processes are in place. And so you're staffing all year round. And in the meantime, you've got a team that are doing programming, and you have to look at how you're going to update and refresh your programming. And in the earlier days, when everything wasn't entirely digital, then you had this, these print materials that had to be redone every year with new dates and new prices and new offerings. And so that journey took a long time to ramp up. And, between Julian, Tina, Adrian, myself, in the latter years, we would also travel the globe to go meet families all around the world and tell them about everything we did and convince them to come and spend their summer with us. And so it was, until you do it, you don't know. And I think it's like that about anything. Once you get into somebody else's shoes, you start to realize, wow, I never knew. And many people thought we took, the off season, we only worked kind of in summer, and then the rest of the year we were lying on the beach, which would have been lovely, but that was certainly not the case of what we needed to do. Also, because we had so many partners, university partners and different departments, there was always a communication. The marketing team would give them feedback as to what happened, and we'd be talking about what's going on next year. So, wow, nonstop. Almost the second summer was over, we were back in the trenches, looking to what we'd be doing the next summer and reviewing what we learned and reviewing what we thought and what we knew and trying to make sure that we were relevant for the upcoming year.
I remember, to give the listeners a visual, the operation had 2 indoor clubs, and at one of the indoor clubs, you go up on the second floor, and that's where you and your team worked.
Yep.
I would be there to help train the tennis coaches, but it was just always interesting to me to just be in the office and just just see what everybody was doing to make the operation go, because I was just there for the tennis, but there was certainly way more than the tennis going on.
The best thing about my office, Steve, is I would just, whenever I was on a phone call, I would be able to just turn my chair and look out a really big window onto tennis courts and watch people playing and watch the coaches coaching. It was amazing.
With your book, Juan Sebastian Marinque from Colombia, his brother Alfie, Juan tells me he has 4 names. He gave me a copy of your book.
I got to step in here. Manrique.
Say that again?
Manrique.
And I know you were so humble, and when I first talked to you on the phone about being on the podcast, and say, well, what you're doing is not tennis now, but really it's so related to tennis. I think it's tennis is a microcosm of life, and 100% of the tennis industry. I mean, it's every industry has to deal with. I have right here Gen Z, most connected and most disconnected. But there's. So your work evolved. I mean, you've been in the kid business for a long time. Why don't you tell us about how that evolved and to the point where you're doing what you're doing now, and even circle back and tell us like what have you been doing with the Eagles and the 76ers and other corporations and universities? Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Steve, the journey, pulling it all together into kind of one document doesn't really do justice, because there's certainly so much that we've learned over the years that didn't make it into print. But, I guess the aha moment, for us working with these kids, as I said to you a little earlier, watching these generations come past in front of us and watching them grow, watching what they valued and how they communicated and even engaged with each other and how they processed information. And so we're watching this over time, and we started to realize, especially when it came to the coaching and the training of our own staff, that the methods and methodology that we relied on for so long just was not producing the same fruit. The content just wasn't sticking in the same way, and certainly the results when it came to impacting our customers, the students that were with us, was just not there. And so we did a deep dive, first of all, look at what we're doing wrong and what we could do better. And it's amazing that as you continue to learn, you realize that the more you know, the less you know, right? And so you keep diving, keep trying to unpack what does this look like and what should it look like. And so we got probably about 8 years, maybe 10 years ago, to a really nice rhythm where we started to understand this premise of an invisible curriculum and how you need to invisibly teach people a skill without them knowing they're learning a skill. And so we started to roll that out. Now we can unpack that more later. But and so that became a bit of a foundation, not only in how we try to teach everything, but certainly how we trained our trainers, right? Trained our instructors and our coaches and those kind of people. And what we started to see there was that the engagement changed. We started to see that the fruit was different. And so, you tinker with it and you start to realize that we're starting to see a different result, and therefore what we're doing is obviously working. And, over the years, been able to refine that a whole lot and put a whole lot more meat on those bones. But it leads to everything. It really has impacted us in every way. I love the story. Just when we look at a generation, and with your permission, I'll just give you a quick analogy. The summary of what this is that I have heard way too many people say that Gen Z or teenagers are just teenagers going through a phase. And so when you unpack a comment or a statement like that, what that is actually saying is that we are right, meaning the older generations, and the younger generations are wrong. They're just teenagers going through a phase. And when they completed going through that phase and they snap out of that phase, they'll start to behave like us. And historically, that's actually true. The generations tended to get to their late 20s, their 30s, and start to behave like the generation that came before them, much more so than they did previously in their teenage years. But what happens with this new generation, and this is important in every component of our lives, is that they aren't just teenagers going through a phase. You see, they're truly fundamentally wired differently. And so understanding that was such an aha moment, such a revelation for us as a business and for me personally, of course, because that all of a sudden gave me a perspective that I'd never had before. And the perspective analogy that I'd love to share with you, and I shared it with you the other day, Steve, so tell me if I do a good job sharing it with you. If you just look at the primary colors, we know that blue is a primary color. And if you imagine a big can of blue paint, that blue paint represents all generations that came before Gen Z, so from millennials, Gen X, and older. And what we do is we take some yellow paint and we pour it into that blue paint. And so we know that when you mix blue and yellow, you get green, right? And so the whole process that we as a world, the globe is going through is that we're blue and this yellow paint is splashing on the world, and all of a sudden we're starting to see green, right? Now the green represents Gen Z and Alpha generation. And where that yellow paint enters the blue paint is, if you can imagine, that is the space that Gen Z has lived their entire lives. They've never lived in a place other than that. So in this analogy, Gen Z and Alpha generation have only ever been green, right? Whereas you and me, Steve, have been blue for a whole lot of our lives. But here's the thing. That yellow paint that I'm talking about is what I call the perfect storm. And there's 4 components that make up that perfect storm: technology, world news, social media, parenting, and leadership. And I won't unpack those now necessarily, but those 4 things are impacting everybody in the world. They just happen to have impacted Gen Z first, and Gen Z doesn't have another frame of reference. And so when we look at this generation and we start to see them, or we see them through the lens that we see them as teenagers going through a phase, what we don't realize is they are fundamentally different. They're green, and they just, when they look at anything, they see it through a green lens. And it's I'm not oversimplifying it, but that is the essence here. And once the blue people, who tend to be the coaches and the leaders right now, realize that, and they can modify their behavior and their mindset a little bit to understand that green is not blue, well, then everything changes. The sad thing, the good thing, is that every single one of these blue people, including me, is slowly turning green. And if you go back through history, and I can take you through every single generation from as far back as the silent generation, every single generation has flipped on a major technology. So technology comes into our lives. I've told you 3 other things in addition to technology, but that comes into our lives and starts to change the way we interact with each other, with the world. And that is what fundamentally wires a generation differently. And that's all that's happened here. We just haven't recognized it. So what we are waiting for is for them to snap out of this phase, and we're waiting for them to start to behave differently when they're actually not going to. And so that journey, is that good so far?
Yeah.
That journey has led to a whole lot of conversations with, groups like the Eagles and a number of other companies that I've had the opportunity to work with. And even internally for us, how we go about doing what we're doing, understanding that. And, when you look at some specific things, especially since COVID, recruitment and retention of staff has been almost impossible. Almost impossible. Now, when you look at our list of finding 2,000 seasonal staff, incredible, especially since no internationals were able to come in. And so what you have to understand is that if you don't change the game, if you don't change your process, there isn't a way to recruit and retain. And so, with the Eagles, I'm helping their guest experience people understand and figure out how to recruit and retain people to work at an Eagles game. It's a funny thing about that, right? If you're an Eagles fan, you would think you want to work at an Eagles game. But the actual fact is, of the 5, 6, 7, 800 people that they have working on game day, probably only 100, 150 get to see the game. So I, as an Eagles fan, wouldn't want to work there because I'd probably get put somewhere where I can't see the game. So you've got to start to change the narrative. And so that's part of what this whole journey with corporations has been, and even with us, is changing the narrative of what it looks like to work, looks like to be engaged, looks like to be part of something. And that is what's really causing such a different result. So there is an ad Domino's Pizza has been running. So they've actually run 2 ads that are genius, and this shows me that Domino's Pizza is what I call a future-proof company. And that's our whole mission in life, is to become future-proof, and to future-proof our kids, and to future-proof our businesses, because there's a lot of ebbs and flows, and that's why future-proofing is so important. So what they did is they did 2 things. They understood that the narrative of working for Domino's is poor. I don't know anybody who would rush to go and work at Domino's, right? And post-COVID, they couldn't get people to work for them. So they ran an ad campaign that said, we can't find any drivers to deliver your pizza. So if you come pick up your pizza, we'll give you a tip of $3 as though you were the driver. So that's genius. So what they've done is they've started to reimagine the narrative around working. The better one is this. They ran a campaign of a young lady who says something along the lines of, I started working at Domino's when I was 17, and now at 27, I own 2 franchises. Okay? So I'm telling you that story to tell you this, is that the whole premise of leadership, the whole premise of business, the whole premise of getting people to work within a business has shifted dramatically. And narrative, thanks to Instagram and to Snapchat, narrative, it's actually always been a thing, but narrative and culture have changed so much that you have to understand your customer and be able to tell a story that's compelling to them. So that's the space we've been in, Steve. It's the space of helping corporations, organizations look at this next generation through a different lens. And it's not just as employees. This is their biggest customer group. And so most people have been very open to hearing what we've learned over, 2.5 generations, 25 years, and then figuring out what that applies or how that applies to them as a business. I'll take a breath. I feel like I went on too long there. Sorry.
Andres?
No, nothing. I was amazed to hear that story about Domino's. I had not heard that.
One thing with I was listening to Joel Trucker, the tennis writer, and he was asked about what his plans are for the future, and the answer was, I hope I have some good sentences within me. Your book has so many great sentences. I have this one down. If you could just touch upon this, elaborate. It's very compelling. I know it sounds crazy that parents must earn the right to be heard in the lives of their children, but it's absolutely true. Could you comment on that?
Well, whoever wrote that is a genius. I love that sentence. So cool. That's fantastic. Steve, we live in an Instagram world, whether you like it or not. And it's not about an Instagram world. We live in a world that's very, very visual, right? And so what we've started to learn is that the visual candy that gives us endorphins and dopamine. That is what every one of us as coaches, employers, parents are competing against. If your child, no matter what age, has been exposed to our digital world, then the visual is extremely compelling. Now, here's what happens. When children leave home, go out with friends, they're on their best behavior. They come home, they're in their most relaxed, right? Parents are at their most relaxed. And then what happens is the child, and by the way, everybody's green in this space already, right? So this is not just children we're talking about. The child now is sitting at home and looks around. Okay, mom is on her phone. Dad is watching TV. What am I going to do? Well, they move very quickly to a device. Why? Because there is compelling content on the device, right? And when you look at the content that's being delivered, whether it's on a device or through whatever the method of delivery is, it doesn't really matter. There is so much compelling content that it is difficult to decide what it is that you would like to watch or be a part of, right? Well, when you put that into a priority list, your parents are going to struggle mightily to be on that list of compelling content, which means that they get sidebarred as a parent. You get sidebarred. And your child now puts other 5, 10, 15 people in the queue ahead of you because their content is more compelling, right? So if you look at it in the sense of an influencer, what you have is you've got these 5 or 10 or 15 influencers that the child is looking for, and you're watching, the child is watching, your own child is watching, and then you're saying to your child, put down your phone and come and be with us. But when you look at what come and be with us looks like and what it means, there is nothing exciting or compelling about that. So to ask a child to do that and expect that to be meaningful and deliberate and long-lasting is lunacy, right? It's just not realistic. Everything that we have in our lives, from marketing campaigns to TV shows to sports, have adjusted to make sure that they stay compelling, because they realize if they're not compelling enough, they won't retain the attention of the viewer, right? And so as a parent, I'm so lucky. I get an opportunity to speak to so many parents. And it's a foreign concept that I brought you into this world and now I have to have permission to speak into your life. Well, you will be able to tell your child to do certain things. But the reality of any good parent is that it has to go significantly further than that. If you want to have meaningful influence in your child's life, you have to win them over. Just like you have to win over an employee if you truly want to pour into their lives and have a meaningful impact in their lives. And so it's not different. It's just amplified in the sense that there is so much right now that is amazingly engaging, exciting, and compelling, competing for every one of our lives, minds, eyeballs, that you have to understand that's what is required to get through the gate, the entry point. Once you've established that you are of value and you are compelling, then a relationship happens. And when a relationship happens, that allows the deep dive that isn't always this fanfare. Now, compelling isn't always a song and dance. It just means meaningful. And you have to figure out what is meaningful to any specific person, and in this case, to your child. So it's a frightening journey because, one, it is tiring. But if you are deliberate about it, you start to see the results. The point is that if you're not deliberate about it, what you see is your child on a device at home. And so you think, well, they're home, so they're safe. But you're missing out on one of the most important components of your journey and their journey. And that's you being an adult and a parent and a deliberate influence in your own child's life. And influence in this case is not manipulation. It's being an influence because what you're bringing and pouring into their lives is of value. And so it's a foreign concept to think you have to qualify. But the truth is you've always had to. We just have so much more that's competing. So it is really in the forefront, and it's very visible now that you can see that you don't really have a say. We've always been in the place where I would say to parents, by the age of your child starting high school, at that point, your influence in their lives wanes dramatically. That age group, call it 14, is now down to about 9 or 8. And so the time that you have to establish that connection on a really deep level when they are at an age where they can start to understand all the different content that's coming at them has really moved down to a young age. And I don't think it's a good thing. It is.
Wow.
And so parents have to really get that. You've got a really short space of time to establish that relationship and own that relationship. But the truth is, that's what life has always been. It's been about well-established relationships. We just haven't had to nurture them in a while, and we're starting to see, I keep saying fruit, okay, I'll use that analogy. We're starting to see that the fruit tree is not producing the same kind of fruit because we didn't water it and nurture it and put, take really good care of it when we were supposed to, that in terms of a relationship. And now we're starting to see, wow, something's going on here. What do we do now? That's where we are, and I think that reality is not going to lessen, because if you look around you, it's not just the kids that are being drawn into this compelling content. Adults are as well. And so you've got to really take a step out of that space to find this mutual uncommon ground where you can both do something amazing, cool, interesting, fun, enjoyable together so that you can build relationships. And it's a new world, and it's a new responsibility, and that's not going to change.
Andres?
Yeah, it was around that part of the book that I think that Steve took that quote or that line from. I think you were talking about how parents feel that, I think you were talking about that the poverty line was classified as $1.90 per day, and then how parents, or how generations, the mortality rates had increased with, every 20, 30 years. So parents kind of fall into the trap thinking, my son or daughter is inside their room, they're safe, right? They're protected from the outdoors, they're protected from the unknown, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, it's a thing called Meanwhirl syndrome, right? So Meanwhirl syndrome was it's a cognitive bias that was studied in the 1970s, and the cognitive bias of Meanwhirl syndrome is as follows. It's a direct correlation between the amount of violent television in the 70s, is when they did this experiment or the study, the violent television that you watch and the irrational fear that you have of the world around you, right? So when you look at that study, which was, again, an incredible study, you start to see that you are incredibly influenced by, in the 70s, violent television. You fast forward to today, and you can see that Meanwhirl syndrome is being amplified because the number of connected screens you actually can't even count, and the number of outlets that are giving you this content on a daily basis, you cannot turn off the faucet. The flow is so powerful, right? You look at the content and you look at what typically sells the news, and you see that there is an immense amount of negative content out there. And so what you have is this amplification of this thing, Meanwhirl syndrome, this irrational fear of the world outside. And even during COVID, we were, as a globe, in the safest, healthiest, wealthiest time in recorded human history, right? I know there's a war going on in Ukraine. I know we're still coming through telltale coach ends of COVID. Safest, wealthiest, healthiest time in recorded human history. But we feel like if we just go from Pennsylvania to Delaware, we're going to die. And, it's a frightening thing. And so it's this irrational fear. Now, of course, there are things that you need to be fearful of, but this cognitive bias is the irrational fear. And so when this irrational fear is present in our lives because there's things going on, and as you said, Andres, that my child is in their room on the phone, well, they're safe. But what they are safe from in terms of the outside world, you have not protected them. What they are not safe from on the screen. And this is not an attack on screens and on social media. This is an attack on digital media. This is an attack on the content that is available 24/7. That a parent doesn't have the opportunity to measure in the same way or filter in the same way as they would you walking across a busy road, right? And they could help you across the road and not get run over. So, yeah, and as a result of that, again, by the time we notice the fruit, the suicide, depression, anxiety, those kinds of things, some of which have their roots in this, by the time we noticed that, it was almost, like, oh, what happened? And there's a major shift as well. I must just say this. I am not against technology. I'm actually really pro-technology. I'm like a tech geek, right? The responsibility of the user and the parents, it's their responsibility to use that technology in a way that makes sense and is safe, right? And so you've got to take that responsibility. I can also tell you that we have passed an inflection point. Millennials were part of that inflection point where the cell phone, which was just a really good use, the smartphone was a really good outlet for this data flow and this technology, right? The cell phone moved from a toy to a tool. And so that inflection point is significant for you to understand, because at one point it was appropriate to take away the cell phone from a millennial, because at that point it was a toy. I had my videos on it, I had a camera on it, and my music, whatever it was, right? But today, in the Internet of Things, the cell phone is such a powerful tool in every single one of our lives that there is no longer a rational and a logical way to take that away from someone and it to be reasonable. Right now, you could say I'm taking away to protect them from the content, but that's the wrong thing. Protecting them from the content needs to be protected. They need to be protected another way. You can't take the one tool that keeps them connected to the entire world and each other away from someone. So that's like a sketchy area to even go in. Most people are going to be like, what are you saying? But that's where we are. We're in the Internet of Things, and we're not going backwards, right? That doubling time, that Moore's law, if you know what that is, the doubling time of technology is just getting quicker and quicker. And so that inflection point where you could take away the phone, not everybody had a phone, we've come and gone way past that. And the phone is a tool. It's not just a phone. It is access to all knowledge, all information. It's your connection to people. It's your connection to work. It's how I open my car. It's how I turn on my air conditioning. It's how I turn on the lights and open my front door. I can turn on my refrigerator. I can turn on my washing. It's a tool that every one of us uses. So, it's a journey, just like the autonomous cars we were speaking about earlier before we got on. We have to now learn how to navigate life with this new tool. We haven't totally figured it out yet. We're in the process of figuring it out. It's not a light switch you can just turn on and off, and now everybody knows how to use it. We're learning the process of that, just like autonomous cars. We're figuring out what it is to be driverless and what it is to, trust the car to drive you around. Those are all journeys we're going through. We just happen to be at a part of that journey that we're still learning a whole lot of things as we go with this tool that is linked so tightly to technology.
One thing you mentioned when you were discussing the mean world syndrome was how we become numb to tragedies. I mean, basically, I remember when Columbine happened. I remembered when, Parkland happened, obviously being from down here. But it's interesting that the passage we were discussing, how with the frequency or the apparent frequency, because you see it so often on social media, that it sounds callous, but we've become sort of numb to it unless it's some astronomical number or something. So, or as I think you mentioned in the movie theater shootings I remember that one specifically because I was going to watch Dark Knight Rises at that time.
Isn't it a frightening thought?
That you're numb is crazy.
Yeah, but the reality of it is, we shouldn't be surprised. And I'll say it this way: I don't know if you're following on social media, but the current rage is for you to have an ice bath, right? Everybody needs to go and plunge into this ice bath or have an ice cold shower, and I do that. Why? Because why not? And it's supposedly got all these good things. But the point I'm making here is that if you do ice baths, what you see is that after a period of time, it becomes easier, right? And so when you look at just this empathy fatigue that we see, what is it and why is it, right? When you look at Meanwhirl syndrome, you look at one of the things I mentioned that is the yellow paint, is world news. That's different to social media. And as we spoke a little earlier, world news is responsible for giving us 24/7 information from around the world. Now, back in the day, I wouldn't know what happened 3 roads away from me. Now I know what happens 3 time zones away from me the second it happens, right? And so as a human processing everything that we have to process on a daily basis, you get to a point where there is so much news that is like ridiculous and frightening and scary that at some point it doesn't move you anymore. I don't watch horror movies. I just happen to hate them. I know some people that love them and they're like, yeah, they don't scare me. I happen to like hot food. I've got a very close friend. His name is Arvind. He happens to be Indian. And a number of years ago, my wife went to South Africa and him and his wife, Coppergum, kind of looked after me. And my palate was not trained. And I went over to their house. They made special food for me and they were having more spicy food. And I was like, no, I'm going to eat what you eat. And I started eating spicy food. And over a period of time, I got better and better and better at it. And now I can eat spicy food. The point is, the reverse happens as well. When you are so used to seeing the negative news of, deaths and shootings and those kinds of things, which I don't really like to highlight because I'm trying to focus on the positive side of this generation, not the negative. Every generation, every person has 2 sides, right? After a period of time, it just becomes like, oh, another one, that's terrible. Whereas before, there'd be a national day of mourning, and everybody would not go to work, but they'd be reflective and think about what's going on. But it just, it's just, we've gone past that. And I think it's scary, it's frightening, but I understand why it's happened. And I can see why people behave like that because it's not just there's so much, but if you don't somehow turn down your receptors, your heart will explode. You can't take such constant, negative, scary, bad news 24/7 all day long and not be completely affected by it, right? And so as a coping mechanism, I think many people those receptors have become numb. And I really believe it is part of a coping mechanism because it's impossible to keep up.
With Steve, could you talk a little bit about it ties in with the leadership styles, the parenting, the teaching, the coaching. Why do you say that Gen Z, born 1997, 2012, why are they CEOs? Yeah,
I'm excited to get into the coaching and the leading part of it as well. So that's great, Steve. If you think about this generation being green, right? And so the way they've grown up is very different from you and I, Steve. I certainly didn't have on-demand television. I didn't have on-demand Netflix. I certainly couldn't order Uber Eats to bring me food when I was hungry. I couldn't order an Uber to take me here or there. And so you've got a generation that has always had access to that. They want to watch a show, Cartoon Network, they turn it on right now. And it's with all the access we have right now, it's on demand. There's almost nothing I can't consume that is on demand. I don't feel like seeing it now, I'll see it then. That is a major shift, right? And so you've got that as one example. Now they grow up being able to say, I want to eat now, I want to drink now, I want to work now, I want to sleep now, I want to drive now, and being able to do that. You also have parenting, which isn't dramatically different, but parents that come alongside you as a child, and how can I serve you? And I'm saying that in a right way, but I want to feed you well, I want to make sure you get enough sleep, I want to help you with your homework, I'll get a tutor if you need one. What classes do you want to study? What are the best classes for you to study? And then when you go through school, you've got your teams at school, your guidance counselors, and everybody that's kind of coming alongside, paying attention to how can we help you be the best version of yourself? You get into university, you study, you go do your master's degree, and they're like, well, what do you want to write your thesis on? Well, would you like to write on this or that? And, even going through college is a great time to say, I don't want to go to a class this time, I want to go to a class at this time. And everything is custom built around you in a silo, right? You come out of this time to your first job, and all of a sudden your boss is Steve Robertson, and he says, sit over there and work for 8 hours. And you're like, I've never done that in my life. Why should I do that now? Well, you've got to work for 8 hours. Well, I'll do 4 now, and then tonight I'm going to go to the gym, and after gym I'm going to have a shower, and I'm going to have dinner, and then I'm going to work from like 11 till 3 in the morning. That's like my best time. And they've only lived in this custom world where everything is customizable for them. Now, not everybody gets everything customized for them, but I'm using that, broadly speaking, in this customized world. And then when you get into a world where you have to engage with others, it's really, really hard. That's partly why this work from home works well for so many people, because it's a little bit back to that custom, I can do it when and how I'd like to mindset. And leaders are going to have to go into that, into that space. So you've got this young person that's the CEO from their own life. They're kind of treated like that from day one. But they don't always necessarily have, it's funny, this is a generation Gen Z that while they're going through this process of figuring out a whole lot of things, they behave like a CEO. They just don't want all the responsibility that a CEO has. So everybody wants to be the actual CEO of the business. They just don't want all the responsibilities that necessarily come with it. But understanding that gives you a perspective on how to connect with them, how to potentially lead them, and certainly how to upskill them for the betterment of them and for your business. So that's a part of the foundation that if you allow that to be an aha moment for you, that they had been siloed and had choice on just about everything in their lives, and now they're in an environment where they don't necessarily have it, that can make them feel and behave differently. And ultimately, when I have an employee that's Gen Z, I want to make sure that they're engaged, but I'm also want to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do and do it well. So that whole premise of engagement is critical. If you really want to be a future-proof business, it's the key. We've come out of a time where we've had a little bit of a sink or swim mentality. Truthfully, since the second industrial revolution, there's been this next man up mindset where, Steve, do the job. If you don't do it well, you're out of there. And I, as a leader, haven't spent an immense amount of time telling you what I want or actually training you to do it. And if I'm not happy, I just kick you out and the next person's there. Well, this post-COVID market has shown us that has been really a big shift. And so again, engagement and explaining clearly what your expectations are and helping people along that journey, understanding kind of where they're coming from, knowing it's not them trying to be weird or have a strange attitude. They've been green CEOs since day one. They haven't known any different ways. So part of the journey in a broader scope company is to teach them, the other sides of what that might look like.
I think you mentioned there that 72% of high school students desire to be entrepreneurs. So it's definitely a mindset that the current CEO managing styles have to adapt to, in the sense that you're dealing with someone that's ready to go work on their own first chance they can get.
Do you want to know something else? It's amazing that they all want to be CEOs. As I said earlier, that doesn't mean that they fully understand or appreciate the responsibility. When you sit on the other side of the table and you are the CEO, that's for the first time when you realize, wow, I wish I'd known, right? The hardest thing for them, the harder thing for leaders, the harder things for businesses from a future-proofing perspective is that 65% of the kids in sixth grade are going to work in jobs that don't yet exist. So how do you as a parent, how do you prepare your child for tomorrow? How do you as a coach prepare your student? And how do you as a business prepare your employees for tomorrow? Never mind just that. How do you make sure that your business stays relevant till tomorrow? And so we're in a time right now where people are navigating really difficult, big questions that are almost impossible to answer. And so the key here is to go down to some really basic fundamentals and to start to ensure that those are taught. And that's partly what we use the invisible curriculum for. So that almost regardless of where you end up, the skills that we are teaching you now and with those muscles that we're strengthening now are the kinds of muscles, or certainly are the muscles that are going to help you with almost any kind of tomorrow. And that's the journey, right? The journey is, will you be a CEO? Who knows? But what you do need to know is that what your life looks like today and what work looks like today, we know that in a couple of years' time, it is going to look dramatically different. AI in the last 4 months has completely shifted economies and the world as we know it. And it's just literally an overnight phenomenon. And So we're certainly grappling with really big questions right now as leaders, and I can't imagine being a sixth grader and seeing what's going on right now and thinking, well, what do I want to do one day? Because honestly, there's almost no way that you can have any clue.
Wow, go ahead.
I had a couple of. I was thinking I wanted to take it to tennis, but then you mentioned AI, and I was thinking about the Chat GPT, and I think we're on 4.0 now.
Yeah.
I mean, you brought up a point there as far as sixth graders. Jobs aren't even going to be there, haven't even been invented. But right now, they're just trying to make sure that they don't use ChatGPT to just do all their homework. But I wanted to take it into coaching, actually, for tennis. I was curious your thoughts.
Yeah.
You mentioned in there about observing someone, and from your coaching perspective, that you were looking at it from, I would do this, I would do that. And somebody else pointed out to you that like 90% of that is very good. Let's focus on the 10%. I'm curious at what point you thought, or if it really has changed, or if it's slowly removing itself. I mean, the coaches like a Bill Parcells back in the day that were my way or the highway, is there still a place for them, or are they just going to become obsolete? What are your thoughts on that?
Wow. Okay, big question. Buckle up, because I'm gonna go in some places here. That person who told me that was Mark Span's sister, and she changed my life with that sentence. Amazing, because my focus was Meanwhirl syndrome, always looking at the kind of half empty, and when you look at the half full and you figure out how to add to that, it changes everything. So what I'd love to say is that the best coaches have always been the best coaches. As far back as you can remember, there have been these coaches that have changed people's lives. There certainly was a time where it was easy to be my way or the highway. And Julian, I don't know if I was going to say Julian, but Julian actually mentioned this to me once. He said to me, if you look at some of the greatest leaders, Steve Jobs, he was an absolute mean fellow, right? And look at how successful he was. And my response to Julian, I still remember it, was, imagine how good he could have been if he wasn't such an ass, right? The fact that he was an ass, supposedly, and so successful, doesn't mean that the key to success is being an ass, right? And so where does this take us? If you look at there's two real things here. So you have optimal learning environment, and then you have skill acquisition, right? Those are two separate things. And the reality is this: if you cannot create an optimal learning environment, the skill acquisition will never be where it needs to be. So I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction. If you say the two kinds of leaders, right? So you have a leading mindset, which I call SOS, and you have a leading mindset, which I call GPS. So SOS, if you go back to the Titanic and the story in the Titanic, which I won't unpack, which is really compelling, they actually had the ability to use the SOS frequency or machine on the ship. They chose to use another one, and so led to them sinking, right? SOS, in this analogy, stands for sage on stage. And so sage on stage is typically your professor in the front of the room, your coach on the sidelines that tells you what to do, right? Your Bill Parcells kind of mindset. Now, I want to differentiate, and I will differentiate between a coach and a mentor, because there's some incredible coaches that are mentors. This analogy has got to do with the leadership style, not with the coaching self or herself, right? So you've got your coaching SOS mindset, which is similar to a carpenter, right? A carpenter takes a piece of wood and decides, I'm going to make this a chair, and makes it a chair. The big thing that you've got to notice about that mindset is the timeline is short. And I'll unpack that. I'll come back to that in a second. Then when you look at GPS, it's a guide positioned by the side. And so the difference between a GPS and an SOS is a guide positioned by the side is not standing there like a carpenter or a coach saying, do this, or I'm going to make it this. So GPS says, where would you like to go? And I will help you get there, right? You see that subtlety? It's not that subtle, but you see, that's the same as a mentor, or another analogy is a gardener. I plant a seed and then I nurture that seed to grow into whatever it was meant to be, right? So you have these two leadership styles that are contrasting. So an optimal learning environment is always created by your GPS leader. So your GPS leader is the one who's really focused on engagement and understanding the person so that they can figure out how to deliver content messages in the best possible way. And in part of that engagement and that journey, how to bring the best out of that person. So they're always looking to upskill them, and in so there is a mutual benefit to both. Whereas the coach mindset is primarily do what I say, what I tell you to do it, right? That's why the coaches call plays, because the quarterback isn't smart enough to do it themselves. Of course, I'm joking. And then the coach has to tell them what to do, right? So the biggest difference there is the coach model will never go away, because there is absolutely a time where that is the best possible thing that you can do. You do need a coach to say, this is our game plan. We've looked at what's going on in the defense, and as a result, this is the play I'm calling. You need the coach to do that. A coach in a burning building says, leave your stuff and go out of that door. That's not the time for the GPS leader to say, which door would you like to go out of today, right? So when you start to look at those two contrasting mindsets, you start to realize, well, it's not so much that one is right and the other is wrong. It's just that one is what sets up the optimal learning environment, and the other one is what is there for skill acquisition. So there's time for me to tell you what to do, and then there's a time for me to get to know you so that I know how to do that well. And so I see that the coaching, the leadership, the training model, I don't see that changing. I see that the coaches who are compelling and have built a relationship with their students will know how to motivate them. They'll understand the timelines that are required, and they'll behave appropriately within those two. And the best coaches know when to be a coach, an SOS coach, and they know when to be a GPS coach. But what I think has changed is the following. We have entered into a time where there are 4 concepts that are at large in the world. And what's happened through these concepts, it's truly changed the way everything works and the way we see everything. So I'll share with you what those are. The first one, and again, Gen Z are already green here. We are becoming green here. We're still blue in many cases, right? The first one, I think most of us are green. It's where we live in a world where we value access over ownership. So, and I'm going to bring this back to a coaching a leadership example as well. But what access over ownership tells you, what access over ownership shows you, is what a massive change there is in the world. So let's look at what is access over ownership. It's a subscription versus an ownership model, right? So back in the day, I know Steve had VHS cassettes. He probably had CDs and LP records in his house. He may still have some. Come on, right? I do not have one device in my house that can play any of those right now. So what's happened is that there has been a shift from you owning those records to me on my cell phone owning every single song that was ever made for $5 a month, right? So now I have access to everything in the world. I have access to all information, all music, but I own nothing. So when I turn off that access, when I cancel my subscription, it's over. And so when you look at that in the context of influence, parent, if the parent isn't compelling enough, the child will cancel their subscription to the parent's influence. Think about relationships. When I'm done with my wife, I'll tell her when I go upstairs, every night I remind her, time for me to renew my subscription to you, my darling. I don't know if I'm going to keep you as my wife. You know, your subscription is due. Maybe I'm going to cancel it. So think about it. I'm saying that jokingly, but if you think about it, that application is true of sports, pro team sports. I'm playing for this team this year. No, now I'm going to this team. CEOs move from company to company. And so this premise of loyalty just doesn't exist in the same way. Why would I stay here when I can go there? Why? There's no logical reason for me to do that. But what you now see is that there is zero ownership. And so that mindset, that shift of access over ownership is a really important thing to understand, because when you're working with any student that as a coach, they are only subscribing to you until they don't want to anymore. And so when your passion, like ours, is tennis, you almost have a duty to figure out how to win them over and keep winning them over for the sake of the game of tennis. You see what I'm saying? Or you can just say, so what? I'll go and play baseball. No, we have a responsibility. And so understanding that access of ownership mindset, it's not a child with an attitude. It is the world we currently live in, where everything is based on subscription or access. And now that is the way we behave. Just when it comes to the loyalty of a blue person, they're like, well, wait, what's up with that? Well, look around you. You're green in so many of those areas already. So access of ownership, massive shift. The second thing is concept of awareness over action. And this is an area that Gen Z is traveling through at the moment. They are truly figuring this out as they go along. And where they are right now is they're aware of a lot of things. And so what I mean by that, through social media, through all that, they see a lot, they're socially conscious, and they have a lot of opinions, all right? And that has been celebrated. And I think it should be celebrated. They have an opportunity to have a voice through social media, say whatever you like, be whatever you like. And as a result, and I'm not saying that's bad, by the way, and as a result, they are aware of everything. But what you start to see, or what you will see, is that they haven't yet figured out what to do about that. So there's very little action. There is, but there's very little action that comes with that awareness. The action typically comes as pointing a finger or standing in judgment over a situation that you don't like. So they are transitioning through that process, and they're figuring out how to take ownership that they're not fully there yet. Alpha generation, I believe, will totally own that. They will not only be aware socially and all other ways, but they'll also take action and do something about it. And of course, there are outliers, or there's people that are doing something about it, but I'm just sharing it as a broad concept. Now, what does that mean in a coaching situation? Well, it's easy to say, I don't like the way you're doing that, and expect you to change, because you are standing in that seat of always judging. You're always being asked for your opinion. You're always being asked to weigh in. That's part of this awareness that that being plugged in 24/7 brings. Like, what do you think? How do you want to do it? And so as a coach, that journey of like, are you going to be voted in or out today is massive, which is why relationship is absolutely key, which takes you back to that optimal learning environment, which takes you back to the GPS. So that GPS, where you build relationship, when you have relationship, so much of the peripheral things no longer impact you, which are impacting the world, as it were. So that awareness over action. And I'm going to skip fear of faith. Fear of faith has really got a lot to do with that Meanwhirl syndrome, where decisions are made out of fear because we're so fearful, not out of faith in each other, the system, your neighbor, whatever that is. But and the fourth one is something called information over understanding. And so we live in a place of knowing everything, access to all information, but we don't know what to do with it. So this is where the coach is really, really critical, right? Because I'll give you an example. There's the YouTube clip of two teenagers trying to use a rotary phone, and they can't figure out how to use it. They have knowledge, they have information that that's a telephone, they just don't know how to use it. The application isn't there. It's just a really good example. I don't know how many people I was blown away by when they get a flat tire, they call AAA to change their flat tire. That just blows my mind. Well, they have information that the tire is flat. They have information that there's a spare tire in the trunk. They just don't have the application or the understanding of how to put that tire on, even if they look at YouTube to see how to do it. So you look at that and you realize that the key role of a true coach, a true leader, a true parent is to figure out, how can I build a relationship? How can I get influence in this person's life so that my vast amount of understanding and experience that I have from all my years of living, I can share with them? Because at the moment, They don't think they need that because they have access to all information. So why would they look to me for anything? Because they don't need me for anything. And so when that transfer of knowledge and wisdom only can happen when you have a relationship and they give you permission to speak into their lives. And when you get that permission, now that legacy wisdom and knowledge starts to flow and you start to teach them application. And that is a game changer, which is why the coach is such an important part of the journey. The work that I'm doing with every single corporation that I'm working with right now ultimately boils down to, let's get mentors in here for every single one of you, and let's teach you to mentor every single one of your people that are working for you. And so that premise of coaching, that premise of relationship is the foundation for growth. And so, to look at tennis coaching, it's not going to go away. But the best tennis coaches are going to understand optimal learning environments. They're going to understand GPS, when to be which, and they're going to understand when to be an SOS coach when it's a skill acquisition process. They're also going to understand that, like my son, true story, I think I wrote about it, right? Learned to drive stick shift. The first day was an absolute mess. He watched on YouTube. The next morning, he'd figured it out by the time we got into the car. Amazing, right? So in his mind, why does he need me? He's figured out the application for himself. From a coaching perspective, that is the key. The application of all this knowledge is what we are there to do as coaches. And I think that's really exciting.
No, that's a great answer, Steve. Let me start with a statement that leads into a question. Steve Jobs, a friend of mine, I don't know if anybody worked with Steve Jobs, but he was in the room. He doesn't really embellish, but the fact that it wasn't a lengthy amount of time, but he's in the room and he's working for Steve Jobs. And the line that he uses is, Steve Jobs never suffered fooled twice. So in the term, I think on Wall Street, if you're not doing a very good job, you can be a coconut and you're out the door. And I think that's obviously changing with what you're talking about, the expertise that what you're developing. And I do think, the bite and the bark, but many times as a coach is, you have to, you're stuck. This is your team. This is the Bad News Bears. This is who you're working with. But my statement leads into, as a tennis coach, you want to have gritty tennis players. And Angela Ducksworth, who did so much work on, an expert on grit, and states that empathy is the number one characteristic for having grit. But what do you mean by, could you elaborate upon empathy fatigue? The Gen Z suffer empathy fatigue.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
So the empathy fatigue is kind of what we were talking a little bit about earlier, where, the social media and the media has worn them so thin in terms of showing bad news over and over and over again. But what you're touching on there goes a little further. I didn't expand on it in this sense. So that connection between empathy and grit. Here's a really important component. There are 4 muscles that are very, very poorly developed in Gen Z. Grit or perseverance happens to be one of them, and that's why I'm going there. And so, how do you add to that, or how do you grow that muscle? I paused for a second because what I want to do is I want to add this. So there's 4 muscles that are really weak. The first, as you said, is perseverance or grit. The second one is actually communication. 35% of Gen Z's communication is digital. And so that shift from blue to green means that digital communication and communication is actually changing. And so as a result, there is a lot of difficulty in communication. Problem solving is the third, which is not the same as perseverance or grit. And then the fourth one is gratitude. So those 4 muscles are just, Gen Z has had very few opportunities to truly build those muscles. And so when I spoke a little bit earlier about the invisible curriculum, that is what we focus on. It's the kind of premise, it's the premise of Mr. Miyagi with Daniel-san telling him to wax on and wax off. And after a while, Daniel-san realizes that what he learned by waxing on and waxing off was a skill that he needed for karate, right? And so what we work really hard on is building these muscles, these character muscles, call them that, around problem solving, communication, perseverance, and grit, and gratitude, because those are truly the ones where as soon as they upskill, they look at themselves in the mirror and they see muscles where they weren't before. That is where the dopamine fix comes in, and we're wired to get that dopamine fix. And once you start to do these hard things and you start to grow those muscles, it's amazing how fulfilled in terms of identity you become. So to unpack a little bit further, just in terms of perseverance, there are very few opportunities that they need to persevere, because if I can't get an Uber quick enough, I'll get a Lyft. And if the Lyft doesn't want to come quick enough, I'll get a different kind of Uber. If these people take 20 minutes to deliver me food, I'll go to these people. So there's just very little perseverance. We talk about the clay court, growing up, and I used to think I had an incredible serve and volley game because I grew up in Johannesburg, 2,000 meters, 6,000 foot above sea level. I had an incredible serve and learned to volley like a champion because the ball traveled so beautifully. But baseline, I heard Julian, the same thing. I learned to play on the baseline a little bit, but let me tell you, serve and volley was the way to go. Then you get down to sea level, never mind a clay court, I'm dead, right? Never learned to persevere and figure out a point truthfully in a tennis game, because I only ever played hard court at 6,000 foot above sea level. So perseverance was not one of my strengths because of what you see in Spain, all these people growing up on clay courts and how they learn to fight. So, those four things, you talk about don't suffer a fool. Well, there's always a fine line. Giving somebody a second chance is a big deal, but taking ownership and being a part of who they are and who they're going to become is the key, right? So Steve Jobs may not have had time and or the bandwidth to do that, but a coach does, right? So as a coach like Mr. Miyagi can invest in growing all those muscles, that is where the true growth happens. Yeah, the skill acquisition will come, but when you're starting to layer the ability to solve a problem, how to really think out a point and how to play points when you're not serving well or serving into the sun, or it's a really windy condition, or like in my case, the first time I played on hard true court, problem solving and figuring that out is a skill that has to be practiced, because until you practice it, you won't need it and you won't use it. And of course, gratitude is such a powerful thing, because when you start to have gratitude just for waking up in the morning and you start to see things, in a way that makes you grateful, it changes your perspective on the entire journey of learning and the entire journey of a mentor speaking into your life. Whereas, we suffer, we all do, we suffer from a thing called fundamental attribution error. I'm not sure if you know what that is. Do you know what that is?
Could you say that one more time? Fundamental
attribution error. I'll give you two examples of what fundamental attribution error is. And we all suffer from that right now. And the point I'm making is that there's just not a lot of opportunity for Gen Z currently to be grateful, because everything is kind of going their way. So a cold cup of coffee from Starbucks is unacceptable, whereas it never used to be, right? So what is fundamental attribution error? This is what it is, and we're all in this space. I'll give you two examples. Every time, and you guys can relate to this, I know, one of you more than the other, Andreas, when you are driving, everybody who's driving faster than you is a maniac, and everybody that's driving slower than you is an idiot. You're the only person who's driving properly. Andreas, is that an accurate statement for you today, sir?
Not in my case. I'm on autopilot and I'm busy on my phone and I'm doing something. So no, I get reprimanded by Tesla as far as I get 5 strikes and I got to wait 2 weeks. But yeah, I would imagine for most people, yes, that I'm in the right lane and I'm cruising along distracted.
One thing for me is I'm so bad on my phone, I don't use it in the car, so that's a pretty good thing.
So the better example in the workplace is this. If I come late to a meeting, it's because you guys have no idea how long the line at Starbucks was this morning. It's never this long. I'm so sorry. And so for me, being late at the meeting, it's circumstantial. But when you come late to the meeting, I'm questioning your integrity and your character. So that's fundamental attribution error. And the point is just that with the lens we look through is just so biased in that sense. And when you look at the skill sets of perseverance and grit, communication, problem solving, gratitude, and you look and you see that this generation just has not had a lot of opportunity to strengthen those, you understand why it's so important to help them strengthen those muscles. And again, as we look at them, we're like, why are they driving like such idiots? When actually, it's not that at all. It's a fundamental attribution error. We're attributing an error, something to them which shouldn't be attributed to them. The world currently, the green world, does not typically strengthen those muscles, just in the same way as a whole lot of screen time is really bad for your eyes. It just is what it is, right? So those weak muscles are as a result of the green world, and that is why we, from an invisible curriculum, have to pour into it. And that's a little bit different from Steve Jobs firing someone because they're idiots. That's a little bit different from the role of a coach. A coach and a leader, your job is to walk with somebody in a journey to make them better. And when you do that, you, as a business and or a coach, will see the benefit from that as well.
Steve, let me just read this and then turn it over to Andres for another question. Before I started your book, I went to the computer and I'll just read this off from my notes. The Greatest Generation, 1901, 1927. Silent, 1928 to 1945. I had never heard of the silent generation. I just thought it was the Greatest Generation. And then the baby boomers, 1946, 1964. Generation X, I had heard of Generation X, but I thought Generation X came after the millennials. So I had no knowledge of the silent generation. So then the millennials, then Gen Z, and then for our listeners that are coming from where I am, just a level of ignorance with all this, is that the alpha generation is 2013 to 2024, which is afterwards. But yeah, I had never heard of the silent generation, and I had no idea the order of. I thought the Generation X was after the millennials, but that's just from my notes.
I'm Gen X, and the greatest in the silent generation were. They're, the youngest of those two cohorts is probably 75, 77 right now. And the oldest of them are 121. So there's just not a lot of those around anymore. But certainly the silent generation is a bunch. And then it goes, boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and then alpha, and who knows what will happen next.
But just in reading those off, there's a far greater difference between one generation and the next. Like I would say the greatest generation, the silent generation, more similar. As technology has gone faster, the differences in the generation go faster, correct?
That's a really astute point. As I mentioned a little earlier, every generation flips on a technology, right? And has flipped on a technology. And so, when you look at the greatest generation, the radio and the television changed the way they lived life on a daily basis. And I've actually got a document that I'll send you that shows you all the inventions through the years. And you start to see what inventions came about. And inventions are often through necessity, right? And so the radio and TV changed the way that they lived life and communicated. And it was amazing, right? It just changed everything. And then you get the silent generation. And in America, the Hoover Dam came around. And so the Hoover Dam all of a sudden brings electricity to houses. And that, just think about living before that. Now all of a sudden there's electricity, and that changes, again, everything. It changes how late you stay up. It changes how you cook it. It changes everything. And then the boomers, they get the microwave. And it doesn't, amongst many others, right? But I focus on the microwave because, again, you don't think the microwave is a big deal, but the microwave changed what every mother had to do. Most moms were stay-at-home moms, and now the microwave arrives, and all of a sudden she can cook a meal in minutes, and that changes what she can do with her life. And it did change what she did with her life. So you've got this technology that comes in, and then you get Gen X with a PC, and then millennials, the internet, and Gen Z with a smartphone. But Steve, you're very astute in that. If you track the inventions through all the generations, what is fascinating to see is how they move from very practical, tactical, tangible to now almost entirely digital. Yahoo, as you track it through the years, it just becomes more and more and more digital, and, as I said to you a little bit earlier, access of ownership. But that changing rate, that doubling rate, so I'll butcher Moore's law a little bit, but Moore's law in essence is the doubling time of a transistor or a capacitor transistor. And it was measured by this gentleman Moore, and he would track how long it would take for a transistor or a chip to double its strength, its capacity. And that doubling time would get shorter and shorter and shorter over time. And so if I butcher that analogy a little bit, the doubling time of technology now is so fast, it is mind-boggling. And so the changes that you see, from generation to generation, these are so much more amplified now, and they're so much more rapid. And the changes happen on not only on such a fast rate, but they're so significant that it can change. It can change our lives. Like, if you think about when you first had, I'll give you these examples. So it took the airline 68 years to have 50 million users. It took the car industry 62 years. It took ATMs 18 years to have 50 million users. It took the cell phone 12 years. It took Pokemon Go 19 days. And that just gives you some sense of like how crazy fast technology has impacted our lives. And you said it well, Steve, that the TV was slow to be adopted. You can have a game, and I'm trying to remember which game it was. I should know. It's not World of Warcraft. There was a game that came out in 2019 and then had 100 million users in 7 days.
Fortnite?
It wasn't Fortnite. No, it's one of the. I can't believe I've forgotten. But the point here is the adoption rate is so fast, showing the impact that it has on society. And so, the TV comes out, and it took years for TV channels to, start to arrive in any form or fashion. News media, only when Murdoch really came on the scene did news media change in the way that it did. So technology has enabled changes to happen so much more dramatically. And certainly, as the evolution of technology, the doubling time of technology, that has had a significant impact on generations. So much so, I hesitate to say this. Millennials were the first generation that were truly studied from a marketing perspective, right? It was the first generation where there was enough technology to be able to truly study them and understand them from a sales marketing perspective. And so it was one of the first generations we really, really knew, so much so that we got sick of hearing about millennials, right? We didn't hear so much about, we knew that, the Gen X had grit and this, but millennials we rarely knew. Come Gen Z, well, wow, they hardly arrived and we totally knew all the data about them and tracked them. And now we have Alpha, and I'm busy, my next book is on Alpha, I'm busy writing it currently, and it's amazing how much we already know about them. And the youngest, in 2028, the oldest Alpha generation will turn 16 in America and start getting their driver's licenses, or not. They may have autopilot by then, right? And autonomous cars. But the point I'm making is that by the time they get to 16 in 2028, we will know so much about them, and we already do. But here's what I was going to say, because we were mentioning the names of them, of all the generations. I don't know if we're actually going to name another generation, because what happens is this. A technology causes a generation to flip, right? Or behave differently. And so we start to track different behavior patterns. But because technology is advancing so quickly, I don't think we're going to have enough time for the people that follow Alpha to grow to an age where we can track them before technology flips again, and then we're in another cycle. So I'm under the impression Alpha generation may be the last named generation, probably not the last named generation, but certainly the last research generation, because technology is going to flip so fast that at some point we won't be able to keep up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the part that I found interesting when you're talking here about the doubling time of technology, like earlier in the book, you were discussing, self-driving cars, but what infrastructure we currently have as far as $1 trillion business as far as gasoline and everything. And right now here in South Florida, we've been suffering through long gas lines. I drive by them, but I see people in line for gas because, we've had a shortage of gasoline down here. And it just makes me wonder, for the last few years, all the negatives that you'd hear about a self-driving car, they're dangerous, this and that. But at some point, situations like this, we have it a lot down here with hurricanes where the lines are 3 blocks long to try to get gas to fill up your car. And then in addition to that, just talking about the doubling time of technology as far as kids with currency, let's say with Bitcoin, or because that's always been something that's been always discussed as far as Bitcoin is adoption and people using it. I'm going to tie these two together. It's how long does it take, in your opinion, for these advancements to become the norm? Is it a question of just span of 5 years before you get, let's say, high schoolers, being college graduates, or what would, speed up this process?
So that's an incredibly deep and yet broad question all at the same time, because it depends on every environment, right? So when you look at autonomous cars, well, the data is already out there to validate and prove that it is significantly safer. And the sooner we can get people out from behind the steering wheel, the safer all of us will be. There's no doubt about that. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Well, the question is, how do you turn around an entire global infrastructure? That takes time. You go to a developing country, right? And you look at the cell phones they have there. They always have the newest cell phones. I remember coming from South Africa to America, landing here and seeing the cell phones here, and I was like, what? These are like 3 generations ago. Why are they using these? Why? Because this is where they came out first. And the newest technologies, we got them. We were lucky to get that in South Africa immediately. And so the point about how do you change from gas to battery, it's a monstrous infrastructure change that has to take place. I'm not saying it's the best idea. It just is an idea, because, when a hurricane comes, you may not have electricity either, right? And you've heard the arguments between mining all the cobalt and whatever it is they need for batteries. Is it truly better for the environment? But so that's not really the point, though. The point is, how long does it take for these things to happen? Then you look at something like education. Well, there is always this tipping point, right? And the tipping point or the inflection point varies depending on the industry and depending on what's going on. So within a company, I can flip a company culture by getting 15% of the people to buy in. You would think you need 50%, but I can show you how all you need is 15% of the people to buy into a culture, and within a very short space of time, that culture will shift because of the 15 people that have taken on that culture. You look at things like education. You just kind of alluded to the fact that, we're facing an inflection point right now with, does it make sense to go to university or to go out and work straight away? Because of not only the debt that I potentially will have to pay off for my university education, but many of the degrees that you get don't truly prepare you for any job. They just, I think Elon Musk said something along these lines. What many degrees, not all, what many degrees do is they show that you were deliberate and you showed up somewhere consistently for 4 years and you put in the work that was required, and that is what it's showing, right? And so, we're now at an inflection point where that may or may not just change, where we've had some universities over the last number of years talking about finding ways to lower tuition or abolish tuition. How they do that, I'm not sure. And, obviously that's very different in countries like Australia, where, you go to university for free. And so, how long does it take? It depends on so many factors. But there are also things that happen desperately quickly. But I think the best analogy is this. I use it when we're explaining Moore's law, is that if you and I decided, Andres, to build a computer, right? And we had to know how we build this. I actually happened to build one with my son back in the day, and a gaming computer was great, getting all the parts and building. But now we've got this computer that we build, and each day we have the ability to double capacity and its ability and its power, right? So the first day we built this, we started up and it's like, that's amazing because we built it. Day 2, we double it and we turn it on and we hardly notice any difference. Day 3, you double it and you notice hardly any difference. The point is you get to a day where you turn it on and all of a sudden your mind is blown. That's what the doubling time of technology does. And so what happens is in AI, with autonomous cars, with battery-operated cars, there was this subtlety of a build-up that very few are aware of until it flips. And then all of a sudden everybody's aware of it when you're in the adoption phase and now you're just figuring out, well, how do I get on board with that technology? So that's what happens more so than the speed. What the speed has done, obviously, has brought certain technology to segments of the market that just made it like overnight changes. But, I remember reading a research article after the CD. They had this mini disc about the third of the size of the CD that was already out, ready to be launched and basically waiting for the CD and DVD kind of market to finish before they introduced this new market. Well, it got bypassed and it never made it to market. But my point is that a lot of the stuff is already ready to launch. We just can't do it yet because we have to change an entire infrastructure to make that happen. We are ready to have all cars drive autonomously. There's more to an infrastructure change here. There's a mindset change. We have to change a lot of people's minds to not drive behind the wheel to do that. So those are the hurdles that typically, you see. But if you have a change in fuel efficiency or in the health environment where you all of a sudden have a stent that gets put into you through a capsule, that'll be adopted so quickly. So it just depends a little bit on the market. I guess the broad point here is that technology and advancement are happening quicker than they've ever happened and been able to happen. And often it's really just stuck in the infrastructure phase to be able to make that a reality for most.
One thing, Steve, with change, in the book you write about Kodak and Blockbuster, and obviously you have a tennis background, and no one has a crystal ball. But again, I think there's a lot of positives about pickleball. I do think pickleball represents society in many ways. It's instant, it's easy. You'll hear the question, well, if you're a commissioner for the day, but where do you see where we need to change? We need to make changes to make tennis work. We do have our 4 Super Bowls, each of the majors, the Grand Slam tournaments. But I come from a position where I think tennis is in trouble because I saw tennis in the 70s in this country, and I spent a lot of time in Germany where they had a boom 10 years later. I don't think there's a boom in tennis. I know people say, well, their numbers are up from COVID. But you could elaborate upon if we don't change, if we don't understand, the multi-generational workplace, and tennis is a workplace. How do we make it work? How do we make it work? And what red flags do you see that what I'm alluding to is that tennis could go the route of, it'll never go away. It'll always be here. It won't go flat like Kodak or Blockbuster. But what do you what would you see for the leaders of tennis need to be tuned in with the type of work that you're sharing with us?
Yeah, it's funny that Blockbuster said the same thing. They said, we'll never go away, Steve. So you never know, right? So I really passionate about this point in so many ways. I know that tennis is a very difficult game. It is a very hard game to be successful at and to play even at a very basic level to the degree that you can enjoy, to hit back and forth over the net and have fun. And so my heart was always for mini tennis as an introductory version of the game. The speed of the ball and the size of the court all being proportionate. And we saw such incredible success in that space. And what was fascinating is we even had schools that built mini tennis courts to have leagues. And And when used to go to some schools to coach, because we actually ran coaching clinics at schools, of course, for mini tennis, I'd arrive with a number of coaches at a specific club, actually a school, and we would go an hour early so that we could play. And we would play these vicious tournaments or matches amongst our group of coaches that worked with me, mini tennis. It was incredible fun. I mean, it was just amazing. It was a highlight of our week, right? And then we play league on the weekends. So the ease of the game, and that's why pickleball is taking off. It's an easy game. But if you track the data, do you know what? A lot of the people are struggling with their backs right now. So the older crowd that are playing, it's hurting their backs because you've got this bending over kind of time. And so, yeah, who knows where that's going to go. So the ease of the game is a big deal. But, I can tell you this. The key, if I was commissioner for a day, I would spend it in two places, really. The first thing I would do is I'd spend it in narrative. You have to start to figure out a different story to tell about tennis to keep it compelling for the people going forward, right? Just like Domino's did. And you've got to figure out that story before tennis falls apart, not after it's fallen apart. And so what does the narrative of tennis potentially look like? We've heard people talk about changing the dimensions of the court and the height of the net and the ball and all components to make it more compelling. I don't know that's necessarily where it needs to go, because I think right now it's a very compelling game, except nobody watches doubles. And you just look at the crowd. Even women's tennis still struggling to retain viewership comparative to men. But I just think one of the lowest hanging fruit, and this is not changing a global infrastructure, right? Like going from gas-powered vehicles to battery-powered vehicles, is to take a look at what's going on with the Davis Cup. The Davis Cup is this arbitrary anomaly, and I don't know why they don't make it a World Cup, a one-time event where everybody participates at the same time. You would have viewers from around the world. I don't know anybody other than the tennis geeks that watch the Davis Cup. Nobody, right? And that should be our showcase, where you have these people competing in a team event, which get support like no other, right? I don't care if you like Kyrgios or don't like Kyrgios. When he's playing for Australia, Australia's going to love him. And I mean, I know he's and so the first thing I would do is that I would create a World Cup. I would turn the Davis Cup into a World Cup and make everybody compete there and then, and that would be it. You do the qualifiers like the World Cup, and you'd make that happen. I'm sure there's a million reasons why that can't be the case. I would make it the case. Why? The primary thing is you're changing the narrative of tennis. You're starting to give people an event that the globe will watch. I know people that don't watch soccer ever that watch the Soccer World Cup. I know people that don't watch any athletics but watch the Olympics. I know people that don't watch one game of American football but will watch the Super Bowl. The point is critically clear. If you haven't got an event that is compelling, why would anybody watch? And if that is what your flagship is, it doesn't make sense. Now, we've got the majors, which is spectacular. But the majors are individual events. And if you look around the world, there are very few individual events, including golf, that have the ability to really, really, really keep an audience. Look at the tour, how the golf tour is just fragmented now. But that's the one thing I would absolutely address immediately. I would address the Davis Cup. I do think I would love to be brave enough to change the ball for recreational players so that they could play and rally. We would do that. We would make our beginner adults play with the mini tennis balls, and then you'd substitute a tennis ball backwards, and all of a sudden their strokes are right. It's been amazing. Not only is it so much fun, so I would figure out a way to make sure that the entry level of tennis is a little bit easier for adults, which pickleball's trying to do. But the point is that I don't know that people are going to come from pickleball to tennis, because again, that transition is hard, and the skill acquisition, I think it's a very different looking game than tennis. I don't think those skills really, those strokes necessarily translate to tennis. So I don't know that those two are aligned in any way. And if I sent you an article today, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, Steve, but I was trying to draw an analogy between the baseball and the Indian Premier Cricket League, which I'm a huge fan of, and the average viewership age of baseball is 57. I think it's 17% of the IPL viewers are over the age of 51. So you look at their segmented market and you realize that the IPL Cricket League is going to be around forever. It's currently the fourth biggest franchise league in the world. It's only been around 12 or 14 years. And you look at baseball, it's been around 180 years. Now, I know cricket's been around a long time, but the IPL, that format. So what they did is they looked at the format of cricket and they realized the viewership was disappearing and then made a change to a version that was really compelling to watch. I don't think World Team Tennis is the answer. I don't think that the majors are bad. But if you look at the four majors, I don't know what it is. I'd love to track their viewership over the years. I think it's relatively consistent, but I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to draw people into the game. So sorry, I've been in a whole lot of different places, and I know I only had one day to be commissioner. So I've accomplished one thing. I've changed the Davis Cup, and I've outlawed pickleball. I've introduced a better ball for novice people to play with so they have more success. And I definitely want to work on the narrative of the game because it's all about culture. People want to belong, and if I can get them to belong to the Tennis World Cup and be fans of the Tennis World Cup, that's going to impact the game significantly.
No, I think with the World Cup, Andres, you can tell us what you think. But one is in international football, soccer, it's every 4 years, where the Davis Cup would just go year after year. They have changed the format dramatically. A lot of people are unhappy with it, but no, I would vote yes for the World Cup. With mini tennis, I remember you being ahead of your time before it was Kleisters and Hennen in Belgium, and people were helping them. They started playing with a different ball, and no, I think you were ahead of that. And the United States the USTA had quick start. But
right.
I think one thing, if pickleball and tennis could work together, there was years ago the rally ball that was 7% bigger, and the problem was it wouldn't go through a ball machine. But then then Joe Public wanted to play with the same ball the pros were playing with. But yeah, the game's almost twice as fast now with the modern rackets.
Incredible.
And people my age, they went out and played on the 60-foot court with a green dot ball. But Dave Fish brought it up. I had never heard of it. The former Harvard coach, the term bridge sport. But if tennis and pickleball could get together, in some ways they really should, because pickleball has been invading tennis courts. Is that if the thing about, they're now calling it, it's an outfit called Spec Tennis, and it just goes back to way back when they played with a perforated wooden racket and a punctured tennis ball. But it forced people to have skills that would allow them to, say, if they played pickleball, then they could advance and play tennis. But the way people are playing pickleball, they won't be able to play tennis. I think the tennis people, I've said it many times on this podcast, we need to rally. You can't beat them, join them, is that we need to say, okay, learn tennis skills so you can play both sports. Because if you learn tennis skills, you can play pickleball. The best players in the world right now, pickleball players, are tennis players. But
100%. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to disappoint my Brazilian father here because my knowledge of World Cup soccer is non-existent. But I will make him proud because I want to make you commissioner of the NFL, and I want to stay in the NFC East. And you were talking about, SOS and GPS, and my dad is a huge Cowboy fan, and he was a big Jimmy Johnson fan. And obviously there's stories about Jimmy Johnson being the SOS coach, where he was firing the kicker for falling asleep in the meeting. And then he was a GPS coach because when they asked him, well, what would you do if Troy Aikman fell asleep? He said, I'd go over and wake him up and ask if he needs some coffee. But
yeah, exactly.
and you talk about all these like coaches when they go in there, or where they bring in, let's say, 15% of their guys to kind of to create the culture, to make it what it is that they want. But how would you advise, a general manager or people in the workforce on how to fill out the rest of the 85%. I mean, how would you, I mean, besides reading your book, which was great, but I mean, what else would you know, how would you educate those people making those decisions?
So if I understand your question correctly, I'm gonna answer it the way I think you're asking it. You know, pickleball is a light switch game. You flick it on, you flick it off, you can play it almost immediately. And access over ownership is a light switch game. I want access, I've got it right now. Literally turn it off when I don't want it, right? And so what we want to do is we want to bring that mindset to every part of our lives because we're experiencing it in every part of our lives, right? And the version we see online and the version we see in television somehow speaks to that. But in reality, there's many things that are process-based. And process-based journeys teach you to problem solve, they teach you to communicate, they teach you perseverance, they give you certainty, they give you gratitude. And so those are incredible parts of what our lives are about. And so the smartest leaders that I'm working with, people, let me rephrase it because that sounds really arrogant saying it like I don't mean it like that. I mean, some of the leaders that I work with that I think are incredibly smart are approaching leading in this way. If I can take one person under my wing in a mentorship style, and I don't mean mentorship in necessarily the original capacity or the initial capacity, it's got to do with upskill, it's got to do with a couple of different components that come together, even some narrative involved in it. And I can come alongside them. There is a short amount of time until I get to that 15%. And so your question really is about the remaining balance. You'll be amazed that once you've got the right 15%, how quickly the other 85 follows. And out of that 85, and this is not a data point, this is like just an example, out of that remaining 85%, right? Make that 85% now 100% of those people. You'll probably see that 30% of that 85% are going to leave, and the remaining 70% are going to adopt the culture immediately. Because what happens is, when there is a healthy culture, everybody wants to be a part of that. You see, culture happens in an interesting way. If you leave culture alone, it ends up being Meanwhirl syndrome culture that happens at the cooler over cooler talk. And it's always negative. And did you hear, did you see, do you know what he said, what he did, right? But when you have a positive culture in place, everybody wants to be part of that, except the 20 or 30%, 15% that are staying at the cooler talk, pointing fingers and saying the things that they shouldn't be saying. So those people will leave, right? That happens instantly. The real heavy lifting in building culture starts in winning over the first 15%, figuring out who the key 15% of the people are that you have to influence, come alongside, upskill, and grow. And as you start to do that, the culture shifts immediately. And as soon as those 15 people are in place, it spreads. You don't even have to say anything. I'll give you a great example, a Julian example. Steve, you've been to our club where our tennis, where our offices were. And Andres, the parking lot is really big. It's 6 courts long. And so, however many cars would park along 6 courts. And Julian always from day one asked us to park the furthest possible way from the tennis club. So the last possible bay was the bay that I parked, so that I had to walk the furthest to the front door and establishing culture. What else we would do is, if you walk past a tennis ball that's rolled, we have these big sliding doors that would open sometimes to let some air in. Balls would run out. Julian or Adrian would be walking with you talking, and they'd walk past the ball, they'd pick it up, wouldn't even say a word, walk up, throw it back in. That becomes a culture. And within a really short space of time, you could walk outside with any full-time person, and they wouldn't even break stride. They wouldn't even change the subject. They would pick up a ball and go and throw it inside. If there was a piece of paper or trash, they'd pick it up and they'd walk with it to the dumpster, and or if they were going into the club, throw it in the trash can. Culture has a way of implementing rules without you ever having to shake your finger at anyone. And that's why it's so important to create culture. And the best coaches do that. That's what they do. They create culture. And when the culture's in place, people follow. You know that saying, will they follow you up the hill if you go running? Well, that's what happens. The balance, the people will disappear. And it's not a light switch. It takes a little bit of time to make that happen, because sometimes the key influences are the hardest people to flip, to get to buy into your culture, to win over. I'm going to tell you a story that happened with Mark Spann, who you know, of course, and Julian Krinsky, and somebody whose name I won't mention. I arrive in America. I teach my first lesson. So I arrive at the club to teach my first lesson. Coming from South Africa, we didn't do a lot of adult women clinics, right? And in Philadelphia, they happened to be. I arrive on the Monday morning. I got off the plane Sunday night, and I arrived there Monday morning thinking I'm going through some kind of an orientation. I arrive there, and the club manager says, "You're going on this court. Here's your first lesson." 4 ladies, okay? I walk on this court, jet lagged, out of my mind, and I teach this group. And I've never taught an adult women's clinic for an hour and a half like they did there. Well, I did my best, but one of the ladies told the club manager that the worst lesson she'd ever had in her life, right? And so that was my first day. What a mess that was. But it didn't take long for somebody to go to Julian and to say to Julian, "Listen, you made a huge mistake. This guy's an idiot. Get rid of him." Okay. I don't know what you're doing. So word comes to my ear that this is being said about me. And so what I do with that information, next thing, Julian calls me and he's like, "I've heard this has been said about you. Do you want me to speak to that person?" So I said to him, "I don't want you to speak to that person." I get home and I'm unpacking the story with Colleen. And the whole thing boils down to this. What that moment decided was I was going to win this person over, not beat them. And that changed everything. Now, I'm not trying to claim to be a hero here, but I'm suggesting to you that winning that first 15% of people over is your key. Beating them is not your key. Winning them over, and they will be your allies for life, and they will roll out any kind of culture and maintain any kind of culture, and you won't need to sit on the umpire's chair and watch that it's happening. It will be your culture.
Steve, well put. Let me mention war, terrible thing, war. When Andres mentioned his father likes the Cowboys, and I know the Cowboys and Eagles, that's a war.
Yep.
With, and again, terrible thing to every time, or I guess at all times throughout the history of planet Earth, there's always been a war going on. But you hear with Gen Z that they're so sensitive. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to the college coach his team just won the NCAA hockey tournament. And he was asked, are the kids more sensitive? He's been at this university for over 30 years. And he just went, whoa, are they so sensitive? But as coaches, you've heard that expression, if I were to go to war, I would pick that kid. What comes to your mind with Gen Z? How do you make a kid that's very, very sensitive? How do you make him a little tougher?
Yeah, that is a very real question. And, the painting of a generation with one brush is very dangerous. But it is a data point, which means that as far as this generation concerned, that is something that is real. People are sensitive for a number of reasons, and part of the reason is because for the first time really in recorded human history, we've been able to see so much. And if you look around the world at all the wars and everything that's gone on in the world, you realize that there's a lot of wrong that's gone on in the world, right? So there certainly is a whole lot of sensitivity. There's no doubt about it. We've also, as the cycles of generations go, this is the easiest cycle of any generation to grow up in terms of just things going your way. And so that's the cold coffee scenario. It's just very easy to say cold coffee is unacceptable, right? Because you just not had to live through a whole lot of other things that stretched you and grown you, right? So it boils down to muscles. Their muscles for being tough have not been developed. And again, it's blaming this generation and I'm not suggesting that's what you're doing. I just don't think that that's an accurate assessment of the situation. They just haven't been stretched in that space. They haven't had to be. So yeah, they are sensitive, and that's a bit of an oversimplification of what's going on. But when you have somebody who comes alongside a player like this, a coach that comes alongside a player and identifies that they're particularly sensitive to criticism, instruction, winning, losing, whatever it is, right? That is your opportunity to truly make a difference, right? The skill acquisition has always been a part of what a coach is there for. The GPS has always been a part of what the coach has been there for. The fact that this generation is a little weak in the problem solving, the grit, the perseverance space, that is the new opportunity. And so to come alongside them and figure out ways to grow them in that area, that is 100% where we have to spend our time. Now, how does that happen? The practical process here is you have to have someone that you're in a relationship with that buys into where you're going. And those are the two qualifiers that will allow you to stretch them. Okay, I'll tell you a story. Do we have time to tell you a story?
Yeah, go for it.
And I'm mentoring a CEO. We're running together. We have a call every 2 weeks, and he's in a really cool space. And for whatever reason, we connect every 2 weeks and we unpack things together. I always spend time with him, in the leadership space, but where we spend a lot of time every time we get together is based on his family, right? He's got a wife and 2 kids. And so my mindset is if I can help you just amplify your family time, experience, and quality, the positive impact that has on everything is dramatic. And so that's data. You can read it, and it's documented. That has happened. So great. So we're talking about his kids just like we're talking now. And this example happens to be over Christmas. And so over Christmas, I said to him, so tell me what you guys are doing over Christmas. And they happen to celebrate Christmas. And he says, well, what we do is we go out on whatever the day is, and we go to a soup kitchen and we serve. We think it's really important to serve as a family. And I'm like, hey, that's great. I value that. That's amazing. And then he says, and then afterwards, like the thing, we just go out for takeout. And it's just like a really fun time. You serve a little bit and you go out for takeout. And I said to him, well, look, is that it? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so how many years have you been doing that? And he says, well, really since they were old enough. And I'm like, okay, so the first time you do it, it's novel. The second time you do it, it's okay. The third time you do it, it's an expectation, and it becomes, just routine. So he's like, oh, that's kind of mean. And I'm like, I love the fact that you're serving, but there's nothing in it that's a narrative that your son or your daughter can retell in such a way that they can't wait to see one of their friends. And he's like, well, why is that important? I'm like, because you're building relationship. And when you build relationship and you get them to buy into how you helping them through this relationship, well, then you can do all sorts of things. So he says, well, what do you do? So I said, okay, you don't have to do this, but I'm just going to throw something out there to you. And he's like, okay. So I said, okay, so imagine if you did this. You take 2 envelopes and you put the money for the takeouts in each envelope with one of your children's name on each. It's like, okay. And I'm like, and then you go and hide it somewhere in the house. Now, the day before or the day of, whenever you choose, you tell them, guys, after this, going to the soup kitchen, we're going out for dinner, but your money is hidden somewhere in the house with your name, in an envelope with your name on it. Good luck finding it. Now imagine what transpires after that. Scurrying about, looking everywhere, and there's a couple of potential outcomes. The son finds it. The daughter finds it. The son finds the daughters. The daughter finds the son. Neither of them find it. Okay. So he's like, okay. So I said, so then the choice is yours. What are you going to do with that now? Let's assume now you go to this kitchen and you're now sitting down for dinner. Your son found his. Is he going to share it with your daughter? Great opportunity to learn. Wow, let's see how this plays out. Your daughter finds it. Is she going to share with her son? Neither of them find it. Maybe it's a good time to teach them what fasting is about. Fasting is really healthy. If they go without a meal, they're not going to die. Right? My point is this. no matter what transpires there, I guarantee you they will retell that story. And if you can start to think about your engagement with your children like that, if you can start to think about your engagement with your the students that you work with like that, and you can get them to buy in to, call it a culture, into a narrative, then you can start to teach them to do all sorts of things. You can start to teach them to toughen up. You can start to teach them grit and perseverance in a way that you can't any other way. But it comes from a foundation of relationship, a foundation of trust, and you've got to build that in innovative and creative ways, because that's what bypasses a thing called the 8-second filter. If you don't bypass that filter in a meaningful way, you're always going to be filtered out, right? And so then it's just a case of like, I'm tired, I can't play anymore. Well, I need you to really persevere. You have to have a special relationship and have established some kind of a goal to get there. And that is built on having a relationship and getting through that whole 8-second filter. So there is a way. It's going to take more effort. But here's the truth. This generation needs help to grow these muscles. That's the truth, right? So now that we know that, you can either say they've got weak muscles or you can help them grow those muscles. Those are the only two options we really have ahead of us, because it's already been identified and acknowledged that they have weak muscles in those specific areas. So that's the only task that we have ahead of us. And as a coach, I'm telling you that the way through the filter is by creatively coming up with silly little ideas like this that build anticipation, build relationship, and then gives you an opportunity to stretch towards a goal that ultimately will help them in the area you're hoping for.
Oh, Steve, that's a great story, great exercise. Let me say this, and then I'll turn it over to Andres. Instead of going the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles, Steve's daughter went to the University of Miami, and I remember being with you one time, Steve, and I just couldn't believe how much you knew about football. And then when your daughter was a freshman, you were totally into Miami football. So you and Andres, if we were at a pub having a beer, I would pull that one out.
I sit out with my brother more than myself.
Yeah, that's right. But we're not supposed to go public with what your brother
You've already
did.
done it, so it's...
His brother was the mascot for the University of Miami football team.
Amazing.
Go ahead, Andres. What do you got?
Well, you know what? I spend most of my time when I arrive here picking on Steve. I get here and I want to be his first... I want him to take a picture on his phone, be the first picture that he uses. I made fun of him here about the Betamax that he was watching before I arrived.
Yep.
But you were
Dinosaur.
talking about the 4 weak muscles, and the first thing that came to my mind was last year when he was in Orlando, I went to an alumni tournament with my college teammates, and we arrived, 4 of us, and it was raining that day, and he had everybody underneath the tent or the overhang. And
The barn.
And basically, he went, I don't know if it's a new thing. He went out of his way to make every kid introduce themselves. He made every kid go out there and have a conversation. I've seen him go out there and make kids sing happy birthday in their native tongue. So those are just some of the examples that I see that he's trying to, use to toughen up kids. I think he asked earlier, but are those in line with what you would do, or?
Of course. I love those, and I've seen Steve do a number of those kinds of things. There's no playbook when it comes to a relationship. If you are thinking about dating your first girlfriend, the amount of creativity that you bring to that experience is incredible. I remember I was in high school, and we were in a very strict kind of environment in South African high school, and I was actually in a boarding school, and there was this girl whose name was Beverly that I liked, right? And so this is how creative I got. So during one of my classes, I asked to be excused to go to the bathroom, which never happened, by the way. It never happened then. So I got out of the classroom because I know that during that specific period of the day, this girl, Beverly, was in the classroom next door to me. So I go to the bathroom, supposedly, and I go next door and I knock on the door. And I go inside, and whole class is sitting and staring at me, and the teacher looks at me like, yes, and I'm like, sorry to interrupt. Mr. So-and-so would like to see Beverly. He needs to see her right now. And so the teacher kind of like frowns, like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And so Beverly, so she nods, and Beverly gets up and walks out. We close the door, and I'm like, hey, I just wanted to say, hey, how you doing? Like, I'd love to see you after school if you're okay with that. And she goes back inside. Well, I thought that was crazy creative, right? My point is just the things that Steve does, the things that any of us do, just to be creative, because what we're trying to do is not be boring and mundane. Remember, we're living in an Instagram world, and we're fighting for the attention of the people that we work with. So if we're unable to keep that attention, there's no ways we're going to be able to influence them. So we have a task ahead of us. And so it's a challenge. We have to stop being lazy and expecting everything just to work like it did, because it's not going to. That's part of the world turning green. It's not blue anymore. And part of being green is I have to fight for people's attention. And if I care, I have to truly invest in order to get the results that I was hoping for. And so some people do that really naturally, like Steve, stretch people, give them an opportunity to grow. Other people are going to have to work things a little bit. But once you taste and you see that it is good, once you've done it once and you realize what the purpose is and you start to see the outcome, that's the motivation most leaders, most coaches, most parents, they just need to know. They just need a new perspective. And as soon as you get a new perspective, you try it. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, sometimes you miss a day here or there. But it's the journey that you're going on with a mindset of going after it with the right motives. That is really the key. Because you can fail 5 times and succeed once, the outcome will still be positive because you're going with the right motives in the right direction. So yeah, Steve's good at it, and that's what you need to amplify.
Well, I think, thanks for the kind words, but certainly you spent so much time in the kid business, and I don't think you really measure it in experience. It's just case studies, and you're talking about literally hundreds and hundreds, thousands of kids. And then certainly Julian Krinsky, what a mentor to be under. I mean, he was a genius with kids. I'll tell you a quick story. Mark Spann had a group of kids in Philadelphia, and I had some kids from the South. And it was a workshop with coaches, and say there was 40 coaches on the bleachers. And I said, watch this. And I'm from the Northeast. So I first call over the kid from the South, and I go run over here. I'll go yell out his last name and run over here. And I said, give me 10 push-ups. And the kid just goes, yes, sir. Boom, 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 does the 10 push-ups. So then the kid from Philadelphia, and keep in mind I'm from the Northeast, so I call the last name out of Mark's student, get over here. I go, get down and do 10 push-ups. He puts his hand on his hip and he goes, why? So I think you have to, I would think in one sense coming from South Africa, the Afrikaners, especially with South Africans, it's like Canadians are so polite. So you must have been a little shocked when you first got to Philadelphia. But my only point in mentioning that is I told the kid, I said, hey, I'm from the Northeast and I needed to learn that when I was your age. So to enter his world, I said, yeah, but I was your age, I would have done the same thing. Do 10 push-ups. And even though I grew up in the 60s, it would be like, okay, why? I mean, I wouldn't have gone down, in the South, yes, sir, boom, boom, boom.
Amazing.
My age,
just like
my group, we stopped saying yes, sir a long time ago, the baby boomers. The silent generations, I'm sure the silent generations and the greatest generation, they were saying yes, sir.
They absolutely were. And I think the point is just, it's well taken. The thing is this, every one of them and every one of us right now is living customized lives. And so the solution for every single person has to be customized. I've got to figure out what is the most appropriate and effective way that I'm going to be able to get through to you. Sometimes it's shock and horror. Sometimes it's a smoothie, like whatever it is, right? And so we have to invest the time. If we really are meaning to bring impact, then you're in fully. You can't be half in it. And I think people that are half in it will see very soon that there's just no results and there's no relationship. And at the end of the day, there's the joy that comes out of that, and it's just not going to be there. And I think that's really going to continue being amplified for at least for the foreseeable future, I believe.
Andres?
No, the only part that I was going back to what you were talking about earlier about to grow the game, and I just keep getting stuck on that 90-10 statement from earlier.
Yeah.
And if I was commissioner of tennis, I think the one thing I would really try to do is how to improve the viewing experience on TV for these kids. I mean, let's say if you're watching it on TV, or I only really watch basketball during the playoffs, but you see the amount of podcasts that are out there right now with ex-players that are giving their expertise on the games that just happened. And oftentimes it's great compared to what you see on TV. And I just wonder if kind of what TV is giving us as far as these players that are several generated. I mean, I have kids that I coach right now that they never saw Roddick play. So forget about it. Roddick is the youngest one on that set for the most part, right? I mean, it's I mean, I think that's something that's not addressed enough. And then additionally, when you see some of these young pros that are 23, 24 that are struggling, and they're being given a coach that might have been very successful 20 years ago, it makes you wonder if that's the ideal way for them to go with their careers.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult question to answer. It's certainly easy to see that something's broken, but to come up with a solution is challenging. I know that my son plays a game called Overwatch, computer game, and it's fascinating that when the new we ran with Julian, we ran an esports league, and we esports summer camp, and we actually partnered with the Philadelphia Fusion to run a team. That's the Overwatch League out of Philadelphia. They came second in the world that year. It was amazing. But it's amazing that when these leagues launch, it's like $2 million to enter the league, and it's crazy. But you see these guys, how many people watch it. But then you also see that when these guys that play in the Overwatch leagues, when they play a game of Overwatch outside of that, they take real-time live comments from the viewers, and they will stop and say, hey, so-and-so said, I need to show you how I did that roll and shoot. So watch out. I do this and I do that. And they'll stop the game and talk a viewer through the process they went through to make a shot, for example, on a shooter game, right? So they have people that will pay them money during a game to do something. And it's just wild. I mean, I'm not suggesting that for tennis. I'm just saying that engagement is so different. Now the format, and I mean, so what does it look like in tennis? I don't know, but I can tell you this: that if you look and understand that 52% of the world population is under the age of 30, and you take a sampling of the people at a tennis match, and you exclude children that are there because their parents have taken them, right? Like a 7, 8-year-old that he can't stand at home on his own. You look at the group of people that are watching tennis, you realize, just like baseball, tennis has got to figure something out, or they're in serious, serious trouble. And from a viewer's perspective, viewership drives so much of the game in so many different ways. And so there has to be a way. They tried at one point keeping the ball if it goes into the stands. I don't know. That doesn't look like that's still happening. You can't keep the ball. Maybe you can. At one point it was. They've got to get players to give away their racket instead of getting it restrung. Do you know what I mean? When they switch rackets, they need to throw it into the crowd. When they change sneakers, they need to give them away. They've got to do something to bring the crowds back. Now I know there are kids that come to the games, but comparative to where they were, comparative to the number of old aging out population, it's just not positive. And so, you'd have to think of ways to do that. The quiet like golf during a point. We could teach people, like Tiger Woods' dad taught him to play when there was noise. Maybe that shift has to start happening, right? Where it doesn't have to be quiet. Maybe that shift has to start happening where you put something, on the court where I can get up and walk out, during a point. So what? And it's not going to affect the player. those kinds of subtleties, maybe you've got to figure out how to solve for some of those to change the experience. Maybe you're going to start getting people to come and commentate. I don't know, right? But you've got to look at a different experience. The existing experience is deteriorating based on viewership numbers, not increasing. And so therefore you can already see that your plant is dying. You need to do something if you want to revive it. And hey, by the way, I'm not crazy about plants. I know I've used plant analogies all night. It's not like I'm a plant guy, right? So I just happen to use the plant analogies. But that's a critical thing. It's a critical solve. And I think some crazy, fun people can sit around and make that happen. It'll take quite a while to adopt it. So the best place to adopt it is in a different league with different rules where you, kind of like college, adopt it to college tennis and want to see if it catches, something like that.
Steve, one thing, there's so many takeaways from this. I love how the commissioner of the day has changed the narrative of the story. I certainly listen to a lot of podcasts. There's a total of 86, and it's like, okay, and I probably have knocked off 50. But one thing about tennis, when you listen to people speak about tennis, it's almost like nothing can be measured. People are giving out, you said, well, they're giving out information, but is it measured? Could you put numbers to it? But with all the takeaways from this conversation, and I appreciate you giving us all this time, is you took a group of people, imagination is greater than knowledge. If you took a group of people, it could be juniors, and okay, you're going to listen to 10 minutes, you're going to listen to 10 minutes, you're going to listen to 10 minutes, and you got to each write down three takeaways and put it on a group chat. I mean, there's ways to say, okay, let's make this, the acronym team. Let's together everyone accomplishes more. But with that, I've got two more things. But one is, how would the listeners purchase your book? How do they get a hold of you? I would think that a tennis director would listen to this and go, hey, I want to do a remote with Steve Robertson on the deal with, just to talk to our staff on how to deal with Gen Z, that type of thing.
Thank you, Stephen. I would love that. There's nothing that drives me more than being able to connect with people and hear kind of their scenario and just give them some thoughts and insights and help them try and apply some of what we've learned over all these years and certainly amplify what they're already doing. So probably the easiest way is to go to my website. It's Stephen with a V, Steven. J is my middle initial. I didn't want to use it. I had to use it because Stephen Robertson wasn't available. And it's Robertson, ROBERTSON. StephenJRobertson.com is my website. You can find my email address and everything, how to connect with me there. The book is on Amazon, but you can find it on my website as well. From my website, it's aliensamongus.book.com. Takes you to that website. And I would be thrilled if people reached out to me and wanted a conversation. Nothing excites me more.
Well, congratulations on your book. I told you I had it on the couch, and a player came in to talk to me and say, hey, my father's read that book and he loved it.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations on getting the book out.
So excited, and I'm thrilled that you both have read it.
Andres, any closing comments or questions?
No, this was a blast. I mean, when you asked me to do this podcast with you and you told me how to read a book, I was like, college was about 30 years ago when I had a deadline. But my reading now is usually for pleasure, and I usually have time to do it. But it was a blast to do it. I loved reading it, and then I loved, reaching out to like certain friends. Probably my closest friend. The point that you mentioned earlier about having to win over the audience with your kids. I just vividly saw my best friend since we were 12 years old. When he runs around with his daughter, I mean, whenever he sees that she's about to potentially go on the phone, he would literally run around and invent some game. And
amazing.
It was, and it's, it's kind of funny seeing him do that, and then watching Steve over the years create these muscle building activities that makes me think that these guys knew about Gen Z before they were actually here. So it's my train of thought as a baby boomer, and before I read your book, I thought Gen X was before Gen Z, not before the millennials.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to do now is I'm not going to be a baby boomer. I'm not going to reprimand Andres. I wouldn't do that on air like this, because my mother taught me years ago, never say anyone was your best friend, because you're going to have many best friends and you would offend someone. So
I didn't name their names. I got lots of friends with daughters.
But after this podcast, I'm going to say, Andres, I'm really, really disappointed. I thought I was your best friend. But
I was hoping you was going to say me.
Yeah. So, but now we got to think twice before we say anything. But I do want to say this, is that I finished your book, and I was with a couple, a student assistant and an assistant, and I said that was a great book. And I said the book has inspired me. And I'm not going to tell you or Andres or the listeners right now, but by next week, if you tune into a Instagram post or a Facebook post, I just want to tell you that your book has really inspired me. I'm going to do something a little bit different now. So you'll have to wait. Have to wait for next week. But
that made my day. Thank you so much, Steve.
I'm going to buy a CD player.
I'm going to buy a CD player. I'm going to start to. I mean, there's many things I could do to catch up with the times. But no, Steve, all the best for you, Colleen, your family, and congratulations on. Boy, it's really interesting how, and I, having been part of it 25 years ago, and working with the camp, and then knowing, I think back, was it 2008, and you and company, you really went international, bringing people in you expanded in so many different ways with that. And really what you've done is on-the-job training. You've learned so much by just being around young people.
I was so fortunate that Julian and Adrian gave me this opportunity, and so much of what I learned was from them. So I got to give honor and glory to them.
You have to also go back, and I think, and I've read this in your book as well, is that the age span of the generations varies from one culture to the next. So you being in South Africa, and I have been around so many South Africans, two of our pillars, Dennis Vandermeer, and Bill Jacobson. I mean, there's so many South Africans I've worked with. I mean, but you guys were well educated, and they wrapped you with a ruler. So that was a different time. But your education going way back. So I mean, what you brought to the table when you showed up in Philadelphia, you and your wife and crew. But no, thank you so much. It's been great.
Absolute thrill. Thank you guys for listening and being letting me be a part of it. And can't wait for our paths to cross again real soon.
Yeah, Steve. Well, thanks. The listeners are going to love this.
Steven, thanks.
All the best. Adios.
Take care.
Andres, what do you think?
That was fun. That was, I mean, I had that much fun reading the book also. So I have to thank my senior year high school English teacher, Miss Garcia, for giving me the love of reading. She's the one that got me reading about 2-3 books a day. It's been a long time since I've done it, but I plowed through this one pretty quickly. It was great.
Well, Steve's such a great speaker. What I generally do, if a kid's really fast, I said, hey, if anybody ever asks you if I gave you tennis lessons, tell them I taught you how to run. So I'm going to tell people I was his speech teacher. But no, so many things. How about the comment on it's like a quiz. What did he call pickleball? A light switch sport. Tennis is like a kerosene lamp. I mean, it's tough. Like he touched upon that. It's tough.
Yeah, it was. It's funny they mentioned the kerosene lamp because while I was reading it, I was just, for some reason, while I was reading this, and all this discussion about technology this, technology that, and I just kept thinking about, when the Unabomber back in the 90s, when he was, went on his rampage, and this is what he was basically, in his own way, protesting against, which was the advancements of technology and how it was going to sort of ruin us. And basically, you have that one side of the mentality that basically it should be like the old days, and then you've got Steven now that's basically trying to make people understand that it's, they're not wrong. They just need to be able to visualize the way they interpret the world. So I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of put it into words.
No, it's a great session. Lots of learning. Anyway, podcast 141.
All right,
Steve Robertson.
Back to
Thank
the
you very much. Andres Barbosa, the fact checker. He keeps picking on me, but you need criticism. So Andres, thanks for that. But again, that was fantastic. Steve Robertson, Aliens Among Us. Read the book. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good night. Adios, amigos.